almost to, hi Matt, hi everybody. Let me know if it's not working.
All right.
You're live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brookline School Committee meeting, August 20th, 2020. I want to start off with just a couple of things before we move into our agenda. I want to first give a public shout out and a big thanks to Dr. Abramowitz, who has submitted her resignation, but not without much thought. And I do want to say just a big thank you to her. In her year and a half on the committee, she has had a strong voice, a strong advocate for special ed families, for transparency and accountability, and for really putting together with Susan the expert panels and Mariah's help as well. But she has just done a tremendous amount in her short time. We wish her well. She is going on to some great new adventures, eventually ending up at the University of Hong Kong. So she's up in Vermont now, and we wish her the very best, and a big, big thank you for all that hard work, Sharon. So thank you very much. I also want people to know that we are having a negotiations meeting tomorrow with MOU to look at the MOU. And so I'm sending that out, letting people know, because I know teachers and staff really are quite anxious and eager to see that agreement come to fruition. So to let people know, we are meeting tomorrow morning with the negotiations team. And so we are doing that. I want people to know that we are dedicating our August 31st meeting as an additional meeting at 6 to review special needs challenges during this pandemic, and also to look at our most vulnerable population. So that will be coming up August 31st. And then tonight, we are going to be answering lots of questions, giving you lots more details, but we do want you to know that we do not have all the answers. As much as we would like to, we just don't. And so we're going to give you as much as we can. We anticipate there'll be lots more questions. Erin's done a great job of trying to answer as many as she could, and we thank you for that, Erin. And but I know there'll be just as many coming up. But to the public, I want to say that we are looking at the questions and trying to resolve and get answers to you just as soon as we can. So that is kind of the pre-thoughts I wanted to give you. And now we'll move into our consent agenda, and 2 items. The approval of Brookline High School expansion change order, and an approval of roof replacement contract assign amendment. And it has my name next to it, but I am hoping that either Susan or Mary Ellen, or I saw Matt, or I think I saw, where did Ray go?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. There you are, Ray. I'm hoping one of you will have some details around it.
Ray is here.
It's a typical change order for BHS. It's 21 miscellaneous items. And we will continue to have change orders throughout the project. So this is one of many.
And this is the first item. This is the high school one. Is that what you're talking about, Ray?
I'm sorry. Yes, that's
No,
Brookline High School project.
Yeah.
And that, yes, that's a PCCO 9, I believe.
Thank you. And does anyone have some information on the next one, which is approval of the roof replacement?
So the roof replacement is a continuing appropriation, and the importance of this is we'll be replacing the Heath roof and a very small roof on the Pierce Primary and some other town roofs. What this allow us to do is we will then be able to move on for PV photovoltaics on the Heath roof. The Heath roof has not been replaced in the last 20 years. So when you do PV arrays, it's always a good opportunity to get the roof done.
Right.
And plus it's a part of our continuing, we have a database and this is part of that database.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda items?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Helen. Do I have a second? Thank you, Susan. Any questions or discussion about it?
I just want to
Helen?
remind the committee, because it's been a while since you may have remembered that you voted for me to sign all these bills per your votes. And I have been doing that as we approve all of these. I've been signing them as per our vote, will it be today, and then scanning them and sending them back to to Ray and Tony. So just a reminder for those who may have forgotten that you voted that.
Okay, seeing no other hands raised, we'll take the vote by roll call. Helen?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you. We are moving on to public comment, and we have 4 speakers tonight. And so Acacia Landfield, you're up first, and then Amy Lindenberger will be next.
Suzanne, it doesn't look like Acacia has joined the meeting yet.
Okay.
And we're still waiting for Lauren Bernard as well.
Is Amy here?
Yes.
Okay, let's have Amy then. And then Meredithjazieri. Next.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Amy, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amy Lindenboim, town meeting member, precinct 5, and a Lincoln school parent. I guess the first thing I would like to comment is a pretty basic request. I would like the committee to look at, until such point in time when the majority of students in the 1st and 4th grades are back in the classroom on site, to look at allowing extended day to use outdoor space and canopies in the afternoon. The morning could be reserved for kindergarten and for remote plus activities, but to increase the opportunity for their children during this remote time to have opportunity to socialize and receive a supervision, basically. Okay, but the larger issue was that I've written a letter to you, and so far I have about 90 1st and 2nd grade Brookline parents that have signed it. I posted it this morning, at requesting that the committee reconsider their decision to take away in-person full-time education for 1st and 2nd graders. That was part of the plan presented on what month is it anymore? On August 4th. And then it was removed without much public discussion about it in the August 10th plan. And I've seen the slides that were just posted for this meeting today, where it will be described that bringing the 1st and 2nd grade back full time was described as not feasible because of the need to hire more staff and increase the space. But what's really not feasible here, and this committee has admitted it, and speakers providing public comment to this committee have admitted that children ages 6 and 7 and even 8 are not going to be able to be learning remotely at all. They do not have the attention span, they don't have literacy skills. The only way they will learn anything is basically if parents are recruited to be their teachers during that time. What I'm seeing here is a failure of imagination and a failure of flexibility. These children cannot learn remotely. If we're educating children we need to educate them in a way that they can learn. And this will not happen at this particular age. The slides detail that, oh, if you have 3 extra classes of first graders, you're going to have 3 extra classes to get them all in there with social distancing. But there's other ways we can handle this. We could look at getting additional space. We can look at getting larger spaces that would require hiring fewer teachers. We could look at how we are allocating instructor time and paraprofessional time. And this is really, at the end of the day, this is just failing our kids. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Amy. My dad, I'm not sure I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to say the name. My dad is.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, this is Meredithjazieri. I'm talking about a slightly different topic, very much COVID related, but not related to the opening of the schools. So I want to speak about the rising seniors at BHS. These are the students whose very first step of adulthood depends on how we as a community support them in their next step of college admissions. Just to give you a background, I am a parent of a rising senior and a rising sophomore at BHS. I'm a college professor. I'm passionate about public education. I have served our community with different hats. I was a judge at the science fair. I taught geometry at the old Coolidge Corner, now the Ridley School. I was a volunteer during last year evening helping students do homeworks when they had to do it over the Zoom. I have offered desktop computers from MIT to be distributed among students in need. And last but not least, I was the photographer for the BHS play Into the Woods. I really care, and I know you do that too. The reason I'm speaking and I'm giving you all of this is because I want you to please listen very carefully to what I have to say. It's my understanding that BHS has decided to exclude all students' work from last year, even the work that they did before the school was shuttered from September to March in students' GPA. I want to be clear what that decision really means for our students. It means that we basically are stealing from them the effort that they did during those months when they were in school. It means telling them, we know you did all the work, but we simply are not going to count it in your GPA because we don't. It means for the entry for the entire class of the 2020, we're going to ask the colleges to basically evaluate these students almost entirely based on what they did during their sophomore year, which is completely ridiculous in my opinion. It means doing a great injustice to all of these rising seniors in this difficult time that I would submit what we want to do is actually try to support them in the best way we can, given that this is basically the last steps they have with us. I have talked to college coaches. I have talked to my connections in various universities and admissions. I have talked to individuals and the response has been unanimously the same. This decision is unjust and will hurt our students. Why have we decided to do this? I'm completely baffled. Why not help our students, give the opportunity to add the work that they have done to their GPA if it helps them get to better colleges? I want to finish by giving you a personal story about my son that hopefully will reveal why this decision can be so damaging. As the guidance counselor at BHS know, my son had to be hospitalized as a sophomore, and his GPA got badly hit. As a junior, he knew how his sophomore year really hurt him and could hurt his success in college application. He made an incredible effort. He turned things around during junior year, and he was happy now that he has a chance to go to a deserving college. But now, with the decision to basically flush down all the effort that he has done during the junior year, we're telling him that, yeah, we know you worked hard, but that doesn't really matter. I want to ask you to give the students what they really earned. The school was in session from September to March. Students went to school, teachers went to school. There was nothing different from September to March. Give the students what they have earned during those months. He and others have worked hard. Let's not really cut the wings of our students before even they begin to fly. I urge you to reconsider this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Acacia here, Robin or Lauren?
This is Acacia.
Go right ahead.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Last week, I read, my name is Acacia Landfield, and I have 2 rising first graders and a beat preschooler. And last week, alongside 2 other parents, I read a letter that 715 Brookline parents signed supporting getting K-2 back full-time, prioritizing outdoor education, and prioritizing getting all students back to the greatest degree back in person, including by incorporating outdoor education. I don't know if anyone saw this week, I can send the link, but Dr. Fauci actually was speaking about outdoor education as a way of getting kids back in person. And there's not been a lot of discussion about this. I know that tents have been discussed, but it seems like right now Brookline is only using the tents potentially for community building versus for actual education. And this seems pretty problematic in the sense that this virus is going to be with us all of this year, probably most of next year, if not all of next year. So trying to plan for this pandemic and for the next one using outdoor education seems like it's really important. What I'm going to read right now, there's not as many people that signed it because I frankly didn't have as much time to focus on it. But this is a follow-up to the letter from last week. This is 215 people that have signed this letter. And so I'll just start from here. It's titled Massachusetts Organizing for In-Person Learning and Outdoor Education. During the week of August 10th, following a school committee meeting in which full-time in-person learning for K-2 and hybrid learning for grades 3 to 12 was walked back seemingly without explanation, 713, although it's now 715, a couple more, Brookline parents signed a joint letter with specific asks. One of these was to set specific dates for each grade to return to in-person learning with an asterisk for ventilation being confirmed. This week, parents statewide have joined together to ask for clear commitments by the respective school district to return our students to in-person learning, either full-time for young learners or hybrid. Of course, dependent upon case positivity numbers, which are currently in the green for most districts in Massachusetts. The current lack of commitment to getting each grade back to in-person learning is continuing to drive families into private schools and homeschool pods outside of our public schools. This is leading to a major crisis and loss of confidence in our public schools among families statewide. Asking parents to blindly trust the commitment to get kids back to in-person learning is and never will be an acceptable process for students, working families, single parents, and our community. We need specific benchmarks and established dates. Families need to plan. Once they have a plan, even if it's one with an asterisk, we can start curbing the exodus into private schools and homeschool pods outside of the public schools. As one of our school committee members wisely said last week, remote learning is basically a staffing issue that we are pushing out into the community. And as another school committee member likened it to a table with a broken leg, and the whole table is going to fall down. We, the parents, grandparents, and community members of Massachusetts public school students call for our districts to heed our call for the following. Number 1, establish a date for grades K-2 to be back in person full time. The asterisk for the pandemic resilient safety protocols to be satisfied. Number 2, establish a date for each grade to return to in-person learning via hybrid for the rest of the grades. Number 3, create school-based learning pods for families who may be hybrid all year, including remote students whenever possible. Families have to have solutions to the very real problem of how to keep their kids safe and engaged when they're working. Massachusetts school districts must rise to and meet this challenge. And number 4, create an outdoor learning task force and commit to utilize the parks and green spaces of each town and city in coordination with the corresponding Parks and Recs department. Our own example being Brookline Parks and Rec approved this plan on August 11th. State parks and green spaces should also be designated for this effort. And I shared in the letter previously, there's a example for creating an outdoor learning task force. This is something that can benefit us not only for this school year, but the next one and when there's another pandemic or forced school closure. I just wanted to also add to my comments. This is separate from the letter. There's been a huge amount of confusion since last week when Everyone seemed to think who listened to the meeting that grades first and second grade would be back in person full time once the ventilation was confirmed. There was absolutely no discussion to the effect that would not be the case. And now it seems as if that has suddenly changed with zero discussion whatsoever. So when the email went out, anyone who listened to the meeting was extremely confused because this was not anyone's understanding. But the email did seem to indicate that there would be only hybrid for grades 1 and 2. So I would like to ask that this be added as an agenda item for full discussion by the school committee, because as of August 4th, that was the plan for grades 1 and 2, and everything was pulled out from, the rug was pulled out from everyone because of ventilation. But if ventilation was the issue, and that was the only issue given last week for why things needed to be rolled back, and I think people could accept that, there should be no issue in overcoming what is now appearing to be staffing challenges, which were not mentioned last week. And ever since last week, grades 1 and 2 parents have been assuming that the plan was still the same. And I think that commitment by the town of Brookline needs to be the same to get these young learners back into the classroom full time, because otherwise these young learners, it's going to be an abysmal failure for them. And I can't tell you how many young kids and their parents are scrambling right now. They're looking at private schools in Boston, in other towns and cities, and this is going to continue. So there's going to be no young kids left. So please, I'm begging you, please add it as an agenda item for full discussion by the school committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Lauren available? Is she here?
Oh, thank you. This is Lauren Bernard, town meeting member, precinct 8. I'm sorry, my microphone, I wasn't able to deactivate it before. And co-president of the Brookline Parents Organization. I sent you all a letter today, and I'm not going to read it to you per se, but I am going to highlight salient aspects of it. In my role as co-president of the Brookline Parents Organization, I've gotten literally hundreds of calls, texts, and emails. Some of them alluding to the problem, not alluding, but speaking to the issue that the speaker before me highlighted, which is this tremendous confusion about K-2. And it seems that I want to speak to two issues briefly. One is about interpretation and communication of the various stakeholders of what the plans actually are. And the second issue has to, I'll get to in a minute. Different principals are sending out information that says very different things. One principal has said that students, not clear whether it's K students and the most vulnerable students, I think that's how it's termed, or whether it's just the most vulnerable students, but they will come into the school building each day and participate with their class in the remote experiences while they're supported by a member of the school building. That's not in-person learning. That's not a true in-person experience. They simply be following the remote curriculum in a classroom with a staff member, helping out. So I don't know. My question is this what you had in mind with Remote Plus, that the children who go to the school building will simply do the remote program in a classroom rather than at home? Our understanding is they would get, it's true in-person learning experience. And I'm not speaking for my own family. My son, this doesn't, he's in 6th grade. This has nothing to do with him, but this is a really burning question that I'm getting over and over again in the community. Another piece of information that there seems to be a lot of confusion about is what is the commitment of a family if they were to choose the Remote Learning Academy. One principal said it was a year-long commitment. I looked up the document that was sent in to DESE, and it said through 12/31 of this year. And another principal wrote that as well. So I think that needs to be clarified this and spoken to as the actual length of this commitment. And then another issue that has been, again, brought to my attention as a elected representative and as a BPO co-president is the homeschooling policy. many parents are considering taking brief leaves of absence for work, believing that their kids will get back into the school buildings in some kind of form, hybrid, I suppose, and will homeschool them during that time in pods of with cohorts that they've created. But apparently the policy from the district requires that the parent turn in a homeschooling program for the year, for the entire year. And it seems to me that if we're in this sort of transitional phase of not quite, in remote plus, and then hopefully getting to a hybrid or even full in person for perhaps lower grades, could this not be relaxed? Because parents obviously can't take off time, indefinitely, but there are many parents who are trying to work out something so that they can better support their kids. They don't have a lot of faith in the remote learning on either plan. And we respectfully are asking the school committee to reconsider this one-year homeschooling commitment in light of the myriad of challenges and changes brought about by the pandemic. So I guess my ask is, could the school committee clarify those first 2 points about, the way that different stakeholders are interpreting and then communicating to the parent community about these issues, and secondly, to consider the homeschooling policy to have that changed. Anyway, thank you for your time and your effort, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. So that's the end of public comment. We are still getting many emails, phone calls, texts. So we do continue to read them, even if we are not able to respond to all of them. So thank you for your input. We're now going to turn this over to Jim Marini and his whole team to get an update and to answer some of these questions, because I agree there does seem to be some confusion on some of these issues. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. And there is definitely some confusion on some of these issues, which we will, I'm certain we will probably get to all of them before the night is over. Tonight, what we have planned to do is Erin's going to give an update on where we've been and where we are. And we should be looking at, a simple one is when, simple because it's easy to be clear on. And that is that how long people have to commit to being in the remote as opposed to being, and when they can make a decision if they want to go somewhere else. And we had discussions back and forth, and there were different timelines, but we did say a mocking period and first quarter of the term. And I think, Erin, that's in Erin's update as we have it here tonight. That's an easy one. A more complicated one is the issue of first, second grade going full in, because we had an extended discussion about that last time. And I think I resonate with this, with the caller, because there was plenty of room for that, for it to be heard that way. There's plenty of room, and I probably own some of this because in my spirit, I think that I wanted to go in that direction. So we'll have a discussion after Erin gives the update, so it'll be more in context. And the one where the students are in school and having remote learning while they're in school, I can't speak articulately to that particular piece right now, but I would be able to, because we're going to do these updates consistently, so we would be able to look at that. Yeah, those are the ones that we should really come back and look at, because I'm sure that that's going to be part of the discussion here tonight. But before Erin begins, I wanted to take a minute actually and talk a little bit about the process, which I appreciate, and I do appreciate the comments from people that come across my inbox as well as the letters. The frustration is in every case, the frustration is tempered with an appreciation for the work that's being done. And really, I think that's extraordinary, because if the frustration, if I were had young children, I'd be experiencing the same sort of, I would be experiencing the same thing. And what seems to be, it's very frustrating from this side of it as well, is that the only thing that really is consistent is that things are changing all the time. And I hate it when the changes, as we're trying to deal with it, and then it feels like we are inconsistent and saying one thing one time and another thing another time. And we'll have to be very vigilant on that, because it's too sensitive an issue, and the change is daunting, to be honest with you. And my emails that come across my desk on my email box from the superintendents from across the state, this is pervasive. But I also wanted to take a minute to say, I've been meeting with lots of people, and what has become really evident, and I want to make sure that, Suzanne, you mentioned Sharon, and Sharon, she had a way of identifying the central issue. Not always easy to deal with, I can tell you that, but she identified the central issue, and she really was able to zero in on those really important matters. And so I've been thinking about that, particularly since she resigned, and thinking, these families, when you think about it, I have 4 kids. One of my own children has 5 kids, going from this year, senior in high school, down to about, I don't know, probably 4th grade. And the complications of her life are extraordinary. So I'm thinking about the parents here who are trying to take care of their own children, trying to assure that they get the best education that they can get, which is a really high value, and they need to take care of their own work so that they can take care of their own families. And I think those families are carrying a heavy load. I think they're carrying a really, really heavy load. And the stress and pressure on these families it's extraordinary. And I think sometimes through the planning, we plan right past that and don't take enough time to recognize that, that people are carrying a heavy load in a time that across the country, you turn on the TV any time of the day or night, and that's basically what people are talking about: going back to school, not going back to school, illness, virus. Somebody sent me something today that said the studies out of Mass General Hospital that children are more able to spread the disease than before, and it's like, so if I'm sometimes feeling I'm down on one knee, panting, I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent who's trying to manage life's issues, and then with the virus, and then with their children most precious in the world. That's a heavy load. I want to acknowledge that. And it segued me over to another thought about these kids. And you think about unapologetically, I'm going to say that again, unapologetically, Brookline invests and spends and supports and embraces its most vulnerable populations. It just does. And I think unapologetically in that, and I applaud, and that's my value too. So I really applaud that. But there are other students as well who may not identify as a marginalized group. And I've been thinking about those kids. And through some conversations that I have had, I've been thinking about those kids in terms of, we don't want them to lose their love of learning, the affirmation they get, being in school, being with their friends, being with their classmates, enjoying what school has to offer. It defines a young person's life. So while we spend a lot of energy, we need to think about all students. And as we say, all means all, but we need to think about all students in our planning as well. And I was reminded of that today through a conversation that I had with a parent. And I do think that my point, I think, is that we can't let the human piece get away from us during our planning, because we do need to think about and be sensitive to the fact that we're not just talking about moving people around or fitting somebody in or just looking at the air quality. All that clearly is important, but we're talking about people and their lives, and the pandemic is shaking us to it. It's changed the norm. We have a new normal, and it's very uncomfortable. And we're all hoping that we get past it as quickly as possible. But I wanted to take a minute to say, it's not just about opening school. It's about embracing the community in a way that we all want to do. And I thought it was important to take a minute to remind myself publicly that through our planning, we have to continue to say, how is this impacting kids? How is this impacting families? And even though we don't have a magic wand, even though we actually don't even have a solution. I don't think anybody does. And we're grappling with it. We're taking it on. We're dealing with it with all of the energy that we can bring to it. But I was feeling a little bit, particularly after my conversation, that this is an important piece that we as an administration have to keep at the front of it as we go through. So with that as sort of the context of, I don't want to be modeling here, but this is really, this is a people business, and it's about people, and the decisions we make impact people every single day. So I just want to remind ourselves of that. I want to remind myself of that, so that we don't take anything for granted. So with that, Erin, can you take us through, and then I'm sure we'll come back to some of the stuff that was raised tonight.
Sure, no problem. Let me just share my screen. That's not what I want to share. Here we go. All right, can everyone see this? Is that a yes?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so just for the members of the public who are watching today, you can find this presentation linked on our website. The link is right there for you. Also, it should be right on the home screen of the PSB website. You can click on our reopening plan link, and this presentation should be right at the top. So a quick presentation today, because I know we have a lot of questions that we want to get to. So I will give you some quick reopening updates, including what we have done to date and what we still have left to do. These are sort of high level, not in the weeds detail updates. We also have a couple of changes that Jim alluded to since our presentation or vote on August 12th that we will go over. Two quick ones. I have pulled out some of the most asked questions that we've been receiving, just so we can talk through those responses in the meeting today, and so that the public has them right in front of them on their screen or in their printouts if they have this presentation. And then we'll go through some next steps and obviously answer more questions at the end. And so just with that being said, I think I'm going to go through, there's only about 15 slides or so, really kind of quick presentation, and just spend the bulk of the time going through questions that folks might have. So if we could save our questions for the end, I think that's probably the best way to do so. Okay, so what we've done, I'm not going to read off all of these in both of what we've done and what we still have to do. It's there for you to see, but so I'll just highlight a couple of them. We continue to send weekly communications to the entire community. We also translate these where needed. We have completed our window and ventilation inventory of school buildings and classrooms. We've run successful ESY, Project Discovery, and Star Academy programs this summer, both remotely and in person. We've provided professional development to over 900 staff during the summer. We've obviously submitted our preliminary and final plans to the Department of Education, established common instructional platforms for teaching and learning. So that's Google Classroom, Canvas, and Seesaw. We meet weekly with members of the Brookline Educators Union. We and you all have responded to hundreds of emails from community members. Dr. Marini and the BEU held town meetings for staff, which was very well represented. And we've also provided meals to students throughout the summer months. And before I move on to the next slide, I want to make sure I don't miss the fact that we've enlisted support of these expert panels in 4 different areas. We meet with them weekly, sometimes more than once, and they have been, such a huge resource for us. And we really appreciate all the work, really volunteer work that these folks have put in to help us as we move forward in our planning. So here are some high-level things that we still need to accomplish. The memorandum of understanding with the Brookline Educators Union. We do have our first meeting tomorrow morning, as Suzanne mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, to begin that negotiation process. We still need to complete our schedules for Remote Plus, Remote Academy, the hybrid schedules, that's indoor and outdoor spacing, and class placements for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. Our operations department, in collaboration with Expert Panel 4 and the Brookline Health Department, are continuously working on ventilation enhancements in all of our classrooms. We will survey families again for additional information, such as their technology needs. They might have, that survey will most likely go out before or right around the beginning of September, so we can plan for making sure that families have what they need for technology, for nutrition, etc. We do need to create signage and other necessary materials for schools to encourage distancing, provide information, describe appropriate hand washing. Our nurses team has already created some videos around wearing masks appropriately. We've talked to one of our expert panels, 1 and 2, actually yesterday, about creating some more videos that we can post on our website, or even like a YouTube page that will be helpful for families to see maybe what a remote setup for their child could or should look like in their home, and or what the classroom will look like when the students are in person. So some things that are a little bit more visual rather than written down on a piece of paper. We do need to make decisions around extended day, and also set up our classrooms with the correct distancing and furniture for in-person instruction. So this is just a quick reminder of what we presented on the 12th of August and what was voted on that same day. Again, phase 1 being BEEP kindergarten and our most vulnerable students in person every day. All remaining 1st through 12th grade students would be remote, and then we would phase in grades 1 through 12 in a hybrid version learning model as ventilation upgrades and enhancements are completed, and as our Department of Health Panel 4 and our operations team deem it appropriate for students to come back in person into the buildings in those other grade levels. Some quick changes since that meeting. So our commitment to the Remote Learning Academy, actually all of our changes are based on the Remote Learning Academy. So in our presentation and in the documents that families were sent by my team the beginning of this week, we had said the commitment to this academy would be through December 31st. And we're actually going to change that and just require the commitment to be through the end of the first quarter. We still kind of need to figure out what that date is, given the 10 days I'll say lost at the beginning of the year. And so again, we are changing our requirement for families to commit to the Remote Learning Academy. That will be a quarter change, not required through the end of December. And then the second change being the district academy will actually run K through 8. So that's a change from what we presented and what we shared earlier this week. we had a long conversation and meeting with our leaders at the high school, and they really made a compelling case around why the high school would need to run its own remote model. We did receive a lot of questions from family members asking about specific high school courses. We all know the high school has a very large and wide course catalog, and we obviously want to make sure students have access to most all of the courses that the high school offers. And we just don't think that would be possible if we moved all of those students into a district academy. So high school families should have received a message from Principal Meyer this afternoon with a little bit more information on the high school plans. I would reach out to members at the high school if you didn't receive that communication, and we can certainly forward that on to, or forward the highlights on to families too in our next communication that we send at the district level. All right, so quickly moving through, we've selected a handful of frequently asked questions that have come in since the 12th. I will go through those questions and some of the answers, and then we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll get into questions from the committee. So first, there was some confusion around the school hours for both Remote Plus, the Remote Learning Academy, and the hybrid model, if and when that transition occurs. So we do want to make it clear that school hours for all students will remain roughly the same as in previous years. So that's a full school day. So for example, kindergarten students who start on the 16th of September will have an 8 to 2:30 day when they're in person in school. Students who are in first grade through 12th grade, when they're at home remote learning, they will also have those same school hours. We also want to make sure we are clear that this does include collaboration time for teachers. So right now, those Fridays that we previously had gotten early release time for at the K-8 level will still remain. The second question being, will students eat lunch at school? So lunch will be eaten at school when students are in person. So again, kindergarten students who begin in person will be there the full day, and they will eat lunch at school. The third question on this slide, what staff will be selected for the Remote Learning Academy? So as you all know, we are currently receiving enrollment choices or learning model choices from families. As we speak, we have a deadline of Monday right now for families to make that decision. And so staff decisions really will need to be made depending on how many students we have enrolled, but staff will include teachers, paraprofessionals, support staff, guidance counselors, all of the adults in the building that students are used to seeing throughout the day will be staffed in the Remote Learning Academy this year. So the next kind of large question that has come up over the last week or so, can grade 1 be brought back full in person instead of hybrid when ventilation upgrades are completed? And we are saying, no, this isn't feasible due to space, staff, and some other logistical challenges. Our space and staffing needs, some examples we have here. So in order to keep students at 6 feet of distance and maintain that requirement in the kindergarten classroom and in grade 1, if they're brought back in full, means that we need to redistribute classes. So a class of 20 would have to be reduced to 12 or 15 based on those spacing needs, which means we need to essentially create a new kindergarten class. So if a school is a 3-section kindergarten school, they would now be a 4-section kindergarten school. Same thing with grade 1, we would have to do the exact same thing if we brought those students back in full. So when we're redistributing grades K and 1, we would actually be taking classrooms from students in grades 2 through 8. So those classrooms would no longer be available when those grades transition into hybrid. So essentially those classrooms would be full. If we bring back hybrid grade 2, we're just limiting the spaces essentially for our other grade levels as we bring them back into the building. And then every additional class we add is an additional teaching section for our specialists. So those are our art teachers, music teachers, PE and wellness teachers, our world language teachers. They are teaching in our models, teaching students in person and remotely or hybrid when we bring them back. And so adding those additional classes just adds additional courses to their caseload throughout the day. And so what I wanted to provide for you is just a school-specific example of what this might look like. So for this particular school, to bring kindergarten back full in person, we would need 3 additional kindergarten teachers, 3 additional paraprofessionals, which is, I believe, 3 additional spaces into kindergarten classrooms, also additional furniture for those 3 additional spaces. Similar, if we brought grade 1 back in person, they would need additional teachers, additional paraprofessionals, additional spaces. That is for that entire school is approximately 7 teachers and 3 paraprofessionals, and 6 extra spaces taken away from either other classrooms throughout the building in grades 2 through 8, or from specialist classrooms like a gym or a library, etc. And obviously additional furniture needs would be necessary in order to flip those classrooms, a 3rd grade classroom, and make it appropriate for kindergartners. Moving on, will schools create class placements that accommodate learning pods? We have decided that community learning pods are not considered part of the public education program that PSB offers to students and families, and school leaders just will not be able to consider these learning pods as they are finalizing class placements. And then the second question on this page, what type of K-12 extended day will be available to families in each of the learning model configurations? We are still, you notice in my what we still have to do slide was the mention of extended day. So we're currently looking at how to make the extended day program work for those students who are receiving in-person education. I just want to also note that BEEP extended day does remain. That is part of the BEEP experience. So I believe that's somewhere around a 1 o'clock and maybe 4 o'clock release time. Don't quote me on those times, but again, for K-12, we're looking at how to make the extended day program work. And then for BEEP, it will remain the same as in previous school years. Lots of questions around the Remote Learning Academy. Will there be efforts to group cohorts of students coming from the same school? So these were some concerns around, community and making sure students are, with their peers from their home school, if they choose the Remote Learning Academy option. And again, until we confirm our student enrollment for the Academy, we really can't give you a firm answer to this question. There may only be 1 child from Runkle, for example, that opts into the Remote Learning Academy. We just don't really know that yet. But the goal of the Academy is to provide similar social and emotional experiences that children would receive in their home school. They'll have chances to interact with their peers in the Academy. Some examples are morning meeting, advisory, potentially lunch groups, maybe student clubs and activities. Each student will have a guidance counselor who will support their social emotional well-being and mental health of the students there. And there's ongoing work with staff and advisors on how we can continue to build community for these students that choose the Remote Learning Academy option. And then there were a lot of questions around whether students who are remote full-time or in the Remote Academy, whether they can play sports. That's really a lot of questions came from high school families about this. And we did get a message from the commissioner earlier this week that that decision on whether fully remote students can play sports, obviously this is approved sports based on other decisions that have already been made. And that's going to be up to local school committees per the Department of Education. So that decision. Just a couple more. Will the curriculum in learning models be parallel so that the transition when we go from remote to hybrid or remote to in-person, will be mostly seamless. So students should be receiving a comparable curriculum experience independent of their learning environment or model. The Remote Learning Academy teachers will deliver the same curriculum and teach to the same standards and expectations per grade level as their home schools. And then we received a lot of questions around the amount of synchronous teaching and whether that's going to be more or less or the same in the Remote Learning Academy as it would be if students were in their home schools. And the schedule is going to be similar, and we do anticipate that students will be with their teachers around the same amount of time. You know, if we are in person, there's some, safety protocols that students have to follow, like hand washing and taking off of masks, and lunch has to be, can't all be at the same time, for example. So there's a little bit more transition, I think, when we are in person, but, ideally students would be with their teachers, what I'm calling live or face-to-face, meaning in person or synchronous on the computer around the same amount of time. And then finally, can I still enroll my student in remote learning if we decide to reside outside of Brookline? So our regulations continue to apply. Your student must actively reside in Brookline to enroll in the public schools of Brookline. All active families will be asked to complete an affidavit of residence during September by our Office of Registration and Enrollment. And then if a student is found not to be actively residing in town, they would need to withdraw from PSB and the school district, similar to the processes that we have now. So what's next? Obviously, at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned some high-level tasks or projects that we are working on, but in terms of what's happening with staff and administrators, we do have a retreat on Monday. That's all administrators in central office, curriculum coordinators, directors, etc. We are beginning our negotiations with the BEU tomorrow. We did send out a staff survey at the beginning of the week. Again, not a binding survey necessarily, but to get some ideas around staff intentions for returning to work or school buildings. Our parent choice is currently due on Monday. I can tell you that we have a lot of families that haven't made their decision yet. Obviously, there are a lot of questions that families still need answers to, I think, before they make their decision. But for right now, we're going to keep that date on Monday. We do have new teacher training next week. All staff are to report on September 1st, and then there will be a grade 9 orientation on the 15th of September. More details as to what that entails will come from the high school leaders. All right. Suzanne, do you want me to switch it back over to you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm wondering if perhaps Hal might want to say a few words about the high school. That's putting you on the spot, I know, Hal, but I think much of Aaron's presentation is more around the K-8, pre-K to 8. I wondered if there's something you might want to add about what you're doing at the high school. A few words about 9th grade transition orientation. Would that be okay?
Of course.
Thanks.
So, the 9th grade orientation day has been a really important day at the high school for a long time. So we have come up with an alternate mode that we will do that orientation in. Instead of a regular day of school, as it traditionally has been, one day before everybody else arrives, we felt it was important to keep the 16th as a start date for everybody in the school. Parents and students are anxious for school to begin on that date. So we're going to have a different style orientation. We're not going to have all 500 plus 9th graders in one place at one time. We're going to have pods. We're going to do it out on Cypress Field. But we still think it'll give the type of rewarding and special experience that's important for 9th graders. And we'll do that. We're planning to do that on the 15th. For the larger questions about remote, it's a lot of the way that we look at what we're going to do for this year is focused on remote. Even when we talk about hybrid and we set up schedules and plans for what we're going to be doing with hybrid, it's about remote, because it's not just about that you have the 12, 15 kids in front of you on a given day. You've also got that other cohort of kids who are not with you. And we very early on determined that it doesn't make sense, and we can't operate the high school as we want by teaching them separately. That the teaching that's happening in the class on that Monday with, let's say, cohort A needs to reach out to cohort B in some fashion so that they are also moving along, so that our curriculum continues to move along. So therefore, whatever we're doing, if and when we go to the hybrid model, is really geared at how are we making sure that we're creating an experience for our remote kids. Therefore, for the kids that are going to be fully remote for many good reasons, whether they're not going to be, let's say, in cohort A or cohort B, they'll be in cohort C and they'll be fully remote. And that's the way we're going to bring them in. And again, we plan on, and our teachers are planning on creating engaging synchronous and asynchronous lessons for the kids who are in front of them and the kids who are not in front of them, so that it's not a question of teaching the same lesson on Monday to cohort A as it is on Thursday to cohort B. That there's a lesson that's happening, and there are some kids who are in front of you and that you're working directly with in class, and that there are other kids who are not in front of you, but you're also working with them on that same lesson that's happening on Monday. And again, therefore, the kids who are remote academy, as the district has termed it, so our kids who are in, let's say, cohort C, they're going to have the opportunity to stay in sync with the same curriculum and therefore experience the same breadth and variety of classes that we think is so important to the high school experience. So I hope that's a clear way of explaining why we sort of moved away from that notion of the remote academy and really are trying to pull all the kids in together. Obviously, we think it's best for kids to be back in school. We're all looking forward to the day when even half of the kids can come back into school. But in this case, we think that we've set something up that allows us to deliver a really good experience for kids.
Thank you, Hal. That was really helpful. Dr. Marini, do you want to say something? Oh, Erin, you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to say one more thing. We will post a handful of frequently asked questions that we've been receiving, not just the ones that I presented on the slides tonight. We're creating a separate webpage for our FAQs that should be ready hopefully by the end of the week.
Right, because Erin, I think you sent your school committee members a much longer list of questions and answers.
Yep, so those will be included on the website.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Marini, do you want to say anything before we delve into questions from the committee? I think you're on mute.
Thank you. No, I really don't. I think we should get into the questions, knowing, of course, that we're trying to respond as appropriate and keep people informed in the schools as we do that as well. So the implementation of some of the suggestions, if we try to implement them, has a lag time as we work with people to go through. So that's may have to have a little tolerance around that without then having to have a lot of corrections. So we're going to have to be really vigilant on holding some of the communication till we've actually been able to connect with enough people so that it's consistent and remains consistent. Our goal is to make decisions to bring kids back to school in a way that they stay back to school. That's why we're being so deliberate around the precautions of the school. We want them to come back, and we want them to come back not to bounce back out again. That's our plan.
Okay, so we'll go to committee members now. Just let me know who wants to speak. I'll let you speak. We'll let everybody speak at least once before we do second round again. So right now I've got Helen, Jennifer, and Barbara. Helen?
So I have a few questions, starting with the high school, because we were just talking about that. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to have a session just on the high school, just as we're planning on having a session on special education. I think it's next week. I think, and in terms of timing for you, I don't want to push you further than you are right now, Hal, but when you're ready, and hopefully within the next week or so, or maybe even to start with the preliminary plan so that we can help, ask questions that may trigger some other thoughts for you guys. And then in addition to that, I'd like to ask, are we going to get cameras for all the high school classes so that what you're discussing and what you're talking about, kids being sort of remote, but there, if I understand it correctly, Hal, and I may not, might be able to be facilitated in that way? So that's my first question.
Sure. So yes, we definitely think it would be a good idea to have a separate session just for the high school and focus in on those issues. And certainly that would be helpful, I think, for everybody. We've been discussing cameras. It's a very complicated issue. There's a lot of qualms and a lot of reservations about it by some, but I want to point out that, a lot of the teaching and that we did through the spring is using cameras, such as this one I'm pointing at. That's a camera, and we've been using those, and teachers have been using those, and students have been receiving lessons via a camera, not a very good one. And we do think, and we've asked IT library services to look into what is the type of camera that could enhance that classroom experience and could help to bring in some of those remote students. Not all the time, not a camera on all the time, and certainly, we're not thinking that we're turning teachers into television stars. But in some cases, there are places where you want to have that full class experience, where you want to have that full discussion, and then you turn it back. One of the great features in Zoom that teachers discovered through the spring was not standing in front of a camera and teaching. That almost all of even our best teachers said that was really not a great experience. It's some of the least rewarding lessons. But what really worked nicely was the grouping features within Zoom, where you could take and split groups of 20 kids into 4, 5, 6 different groups and have them work. And then you can dipstick into each one of those groups and go and work with those groups. And that mirrored some of the better work that is done in the classroom environment. And that's something that we think would be really important for kids to join in with, even if whether they're in person or in remote. So yeah, we think of cameras as a way of enhancing that. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion that has to come, and it will involve a capital expense because it's going to be a pretty significant cost. The proper type of camera that captures voice and can rotate around and can help to really give a good image is close to $1,000 each.
Okay, well, thank you. And I look forward to this session. I have 2 more questions, if I may. One is a quickie. I'd like to ask that when communications are sent out from the high school, maybe not from the individual elementary schools, but maybe yes, it might be good to CC the school committee so that we know what's happening. Some of us who, don't, it's certainly the ones that are coming from, central office to all school parents. I know I don't get them, and I don't think Barbara and Suzanne does. So if we could just make sure to include us in those emails, that would be great. And then the third one, I'd like to push back a little bit about the in-school for K through 2 and understand a little better what you're saying in terms of the numbers of additional teachers. I understand we need these specialists, but there was something that was confusing to me, at least on the slide, because my goals, and I think I've said this before, as I remember I heard Suzanne say, and I think a number of other school committee members, is to try and get K through 2 for sure, maybe K through 3 back into the school full-time as much as possible. So if you could explain, you say 3 additional kindergarten teachers for one school specific example, but the way I counted, if we went to 15 to 16 kids per class, it might mean 1 additional teacher, 1 additional section of kindergarten. So I'm not clear where the 3 additional kindergarten teachers come from.
Yeah,
I can respond, and then maybe Michelle can help me a little bit too. So that particular principal indicated that based on enrollment and the need to split up their classrooms, kindergarten classrooms, that they would need 3 additional teachers because the number of students that they need to pull would require 3 additional staff members or 3 additional classrooms of teachers. So it's all based on the enrollment that they were given from the Office of Registration and Enrollment, probably the same numbers you all received last week, and how many students can fit into the classrooms with the 6 feet of social distance.
I guess I'd like us to really take a closer look, if you could, at that, because just from my knowledge and the numbers that I saw, and assuming there will be a certain percentage of kids who will not be attending, who will be remote, it doesn't jive for me. But so I guess I want to keep on, I will continue to push back on this, because to me, this is a really important point, along with, if we do, whatever we do with extended day, one of the things that I would think that maybe the principals might be interested in doing is cohorting the kids in a particular grade, in kindergarten, let's start with just kindergarten, because that's what we know, who are going to extended day. I know they haven't done the classes yet, and that way you would have less intermingling of kids from different classes. Now, it may not be totally possible, but it might be. So that would be the other piece. Can you give me 1 more second, Suzanne? I have one more thing. I'm sorry, guys, I'm taking a lot of time, so you can shut me up if you want. The other thing that I was thinking a lot about in terms of the students, the at-risk students that we had talked about bringing back from K through 8, and I think the high school too, for that matter. I was wondering if we wouldn't want to consider, as a school committee and as an administration, including also essential workers' children in that group, especially because of their need to be at work and the issues for their particular children. They're doing huge work for all of us, and it seems to me this is something that we may be able to do for them also. So that was my last comment.
Thank you, Helen. Jennifer?
Hi, I have a couple of questions. The first one I think is actually hopefully pretty quick. Do we know what the class size expectations are for the Remote Learning Academy? And I know the natural answer would be, well, we don't know how many kids we have yet and how many teachers, which I get. But what I think is important is for us to indicate at least what we would expect to be a reasonable size, so that parents could understand the relative size of a hybrid in-person class versus the relative size for remote learning, in order to make a decision. I just wanted us to be clear, like we can't say a certain number, but I think a range might be helpful for some people in understanding that, we're not, I would assume we're not talking about classes of, 30 kids, because it's still, someone has to, So anyway, so I just think we haven't really spoken to that at all. And it's a question that I haven't been able to answer for some community members, if we could get some clarity on that. And another quick one that I have is just a check-in on the status of families whose children were in the evaluation process for special education when the pandemic hit, and have been on hold for quite some time, months and months and months. And so just, we may not have that answer. I know Casey's not here as well, but I do want to keep bringing that up and coming back to it, because there's this sort of population of students. So in addition to going back and seeing what we might need to do for accommodations for remote learning students in special education, which is a separate issue, there's also this one group. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to either of those 2 questions before I move on to my big one.
I'm going to see if maybe Meg can respond to your question about the number of students in the Remote Learning Academy. And then for your second question, I would defer to Casey on that and her expertise and her time with her team. So I think we can make sure that she gets the question when she's back.
And let me say, since we're going to be doing repeated school committee meetings with updates, that we will bring that back to you, Jen. To the best that we can, of course. Yeah. Meg, do you have a handle on what you could estimate at this point, what a remote academy numbers might look like? Is there any window there or not?
I think that we could estimate, between 10 and 15 students right now. There might be more, depending on, we still have a lot of parents that haven't responded. But to the extent possible, we want to make this a similar experience for students in the remote academy as it is in the regular K-8s.
Yeah.
So not a larger class size would it be expected than if a class was in session last year. So we would expect not more than 20 something kids. That roughly fair?
I think that we would aim for that. And, as we've said in our application, we want this to be a similar experience. And so we'll have to staff it for that. And, it gets into staffing as well.
Okay.
So
thank you. So my biggest concern, what I really wanted to talk and hope to find out some more information on is my concerns about students in the remote learning academy who will not be being taught by the group of teachers from their home school that they may have been anticipating that they would be with. They're not going to necessarily be with the cohort of students that they were with for, maybe they're new this year, but maybe they've also been with those students for a number of years. They may have in the middle school grades, may have had worked with some teachers. And I'm just thinking about the consistency and the seamlessness. And this is for me, emotionally, is a really big bump in the road. I'm just I keep bringing myself back to what is it going to be like for the kids. And so I really want to think about this a little more. There was something on the slide about, trying to work on community building within that new cohort, which I think is going to be really, really important, especially for these kids, because they may or may not know each other. And I would personally put my enthusiasm behind a model where we can group kids from the same school together with that teacher left, or with a partner school. Perhaps there's, two schools closely located where students may be together, and perhaps they might have some neighborhood knowledge of each other. So I'm really concerned about that. And so we've been getting lots of emails, tons and tons of emails, lots of feedback, which is fantastic. And some of the questions were along the lines of how can the students in the remote learning academy interact with the rest of their school community? Is it possible for scheduling to allow them to attend, say, specials with their homeschool cohort? I know that may be complicated, but if there are ways where we could attempt to continue some of this, it's just going to be, I'm very, very concerned about the social emotional well-being of those students not being connected to their homeschool. And for me, it is particularly compounded for our special education students. So I'm extremely concerned about students being in a remote learning academy, possibly not being with any teachers who may know them or their history, as for all students. But in addition to that, I'm hoping that there's a way in the schedule that students on IEPs will be able to still work with their homeschool special educators, even if it's in a remote model, so that there will be some continuity for those students if they're in the remote learning model, but perhaps they get some virtual special education time. I'm just trying to brainstorm ideas about how we can build those connections for those students so that they don't experience a total loss of community. I'm very sure that the teachers who get them will build that community and have meetings and spend time getting to know one another. It's not that's my concern. It's the sense of loss. And everyone will feel this way this fall. I do want to say that. I do think that it's going to be such a different experience emotionally for everyone, students, parents, teachers. And so I'm just sort of trying to brainstorm how we can help these kids to continue to make the forward progress that they should be making. I guess that's my really big concern is sort of, we don't know a lot about the remote learning model yet or about the schedules. And so I wanted to throw some of my concerns and my thoughts out there to see if there was any way that spaghetti might stick to the wall.
That spaghetti is definitely sticking, Jennifer. And I just wanted to say that I think a priority, I know a priority is building community right away between the teachers of the Remote Learning Academy, the students, and the parents. It's going to be really important for parents to feel confident that their children are being taught and taken care of, and as you know, and that we humanize this experience, you know, as we're all sitting on the screen looking at one another. I think there are a lot of innovative ways we can do that. We could have groups online for kids to maybe pen pal with students from other schools. We can do a lot of team building at the beginning. We've talked a little bit about having students maybe visit, you know, during their outdoor plus time, if that's appropriate. So that is definitely going to be a major concern for us. And we've also been talking with the director of guidance, and we're trying to figure out a way that the guidance counselors who know the students so well and work with families might be able to stay connected to them while in Remote Learning Academy. We have 24, I think, guidance counselors, or around that number, for our K-8s. So that would be a lot depending on, you know, the number of students and staff. But just to have that continuity and to have those familiar things. So that's definitely on the radar screen. Really appreciate that comment.
Yes, thank you, Meg. And I'll just sort of add on again, this that I'm really hopeful that, you know, we can find a way for our special educators to be connected to students that they've been working with in some way. And the other thing I would add on is some sort of way for the Remote Learning Academy teachers to network with the homeschool teachers, so that there's a sense of, you know, history and connection, and they know who to go to if a student is struggling, or they're seeing things that they weren't anticipating, or someone's struggling, you know, or needs challenge or whatever, that they have a network, a system of people who know them. And I just think that's so critical. So thank you so much.
Can I just say one other thing too about that? I just want to say that I think that the Remote Learning Academy are stewards of these children, and we realize that they have a home school. And so in that stewardship, it's incumbent upon us to know them and to take advantage of all the resources our district has around relationship building and knowing students. So that I think that's got to be a priority for us to take advantage of that.
Barbara?
Yes, my first question goes to the question that Helen asked about classroom space in first graders, because I was confused about the fact that I was not confused about what was being said, that if we were putting all of the first graders back in, it would take up space from other grades' classes. And I guess part of my question is, have we thought about the fact, and I guess part of it is that when the pandemic is not raging anymore and things are getting better, we assume we will not have to use the same amount of space between students, that they can move closer back together. But we are intending to get everybody, hopefully, or almost everybody, back to school before next June, so that at least they have some time in the classroom with a regular teacher. And I'm concerned, I'm confused a bit about how that will happen. And I'm also wondering, because we're talking about the fact that when we have to separate children in this way, that we may have to hire new people. What happens when we no longer have to separate children and we have hired new people? What happens to that teaching force? Are we required to keep them on, which would seem to me to be the fair thing to do, but that means paying a lot more salary? I know that's it's sort of an odd question, but I'm really wondering about that, moving from this hybrid model in September, October, November.
You're muted, Barbara.
I'm just worried about what happens when we get further on in the spring and children are coming back. We have extra hires, we have space being taken up by teachers in classrooms where we need to put another. Have we given much thought to those things?
That's a great question. And certainly people who would be hired as additional staff would not be a long-term commitment. But if what you're saying proves true, let's say sometime in the winter, there's a treatment or a vaccine or whatever that allows for students to return and to return to full-size classes, that we could be committed to those teachers for the remainder of the year. Yeah. It could also result in terms of how we hire them, that they could be furloughed at that point. It could be, I suppose it would depend on how we hired them. I think the other part of that question is, are there going to be enough teachers out there for us to hire? But that may be more the issue. But but once they're hired, I think it's probably safe to say that unless we were going to furlough them, you're probably committed to them for the year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just need to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
and I had not heard anybody talking about that yet. I'm also wondering when we move into the situation where we're no longer hybrid, but we have this remote academy and some parents want to keep their children in the remote academy. Will those children just still be part of the class that they were part of before, but remotely? In other words, are we committing ourselves to continue that remote academy for those who want it through the entire school year?
If you, I'll answer that, Erin. If you're speaking for the year and those students begun in remote academy, I think that we would owe those students the year in the remote. I don't think they need to be pulled out and then put back in the regular class unless they chose to do that. But if there were enough of a cohort that wanted to remain in remote and we began the year that way, there's been enough change for everybody. I personally would advocate that they stay in the remote for the year if they choose to do so. And we would commit ourselves to that.
Yeah. And one final question, or not question, just comment. I thought that the man who spoke about the grading, the fact that we're not grading for last year, I think he had a very good point. For some students, those particularly those looking to go to college in the next year or two, and if they have done very well in the first part of the year, I wonder if we could make exceptions if, and I don't know enough about the high school to ask about this, but it does seem to me that if this young man had gotten very good grades in the first half of the year, why should he not be able to include those in his college application? Or even in the second half of the year if there were grades given? I'm just curious.
If you want to speak to that, Hal, you can, but I think it may be a more complex question that Barbara is asking, and that may require, it may be a more complete answer if you assemble with the group that made that decision. So, but you're certainly free to speak to it if you want to, but it's I think it's really a more complex question than a simple answer.
It was a very complicated question that involved a lot of discussion amongst the guidance counselors and deans and teachers and administrators through the spring. And specifically, the question that the gentleman asked in public comment was about GPA. And, yes, what ultimately what the team was weighing was the value of having those scores counted in GPA for exactly that reason, especially for juniors last year, who are really kids that tend to mature and improve academically. And to not have that grade from junior year in a GPA is certainly detrimental in some ways. That was weighed against what's happening with all of our students in the midst of a pandemic. So remember, we're in the middle of the spring here, and we're not knowing the extent of what's going to be happening. And we were trying to look at the social emotional life of students and not putting too much pressure, and also understanding that many students had lots of things happening in their lives and situations happening in their lives. And therefore we didn't want to create situations that were creating increased pressure on kids. And so we created a situation where there were different ways that grades could go. And I think that ultimately the team came down on not including some of these, not including us in a GPA, because of our knowledge that colleges don't use our GPA. Colleges form their own GPAs. So we still, for every kid, will send a complete transcript that includes those grades. And in some cases, that's great letter grades. In some cases, it's pass-fail grades, depending on the individual student situation. But that transcript that we will send to college, almost all colleges, and we spoke to colleges about this as part of that process as well. Colleges take the transcript that we have, irrespective of what the GPA printed on the bottom is, and formulate their own GPA based on their own rules. Since all high schools, since there are so many different formulas that high schools use to create GPAs, and Brookline's is, for a couple of interesting reasons, a little bit arcane in the way that we do it. Most colleges throw that away and form it themselves. And because of that important factor, and the same thing is true, by the way, of the NCAA. So when we had a couple of questions from parents about this earlier, that, oh, this is terrible, my kid was going to be trying out for a team and is trying to get a scholarship. But again, NCAA does not look at our GPA. They take our transcript, they look at the courses that they care about and form their own GPA based on that. So I think that certainly addressed what the caller was talking about. Barbara, did that address your question as well?
Absolutely. That was very helpful. Thank you, Hal.
You're welcome.
I have no more questions right now.
Thank you, Barbara. Who else would like to ask questions, comments, speak? Yeah, David?
So I'd like to turn back to the discussion on community building. One of our speakers tonight brought up outdoor activities and indicated that the focus appears to be more on just community building and less so on learning. I'm wondering if someone could elaborate on that.
I think the focus on social emotional learning is, quite frankly, that is the most, I suppose, the first wave of what people are concerned about. And so they would use that space for that purpose. To use it for instruction, it's difficult to speak to that because we're talking about that and talking about what that might look like, but we don't actually have those programs in place that are going to happen. So I could sit here and say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but it's going to be putting me back to where we were, where we are, where I'm saying something, but I need to get, the teachers have to be involved in developing those programs so that it will happen outside. The plans, the plans are definitely underway to have instructional programs outside that, the easiest ones to discuss are the ones that have physical activity attached to them, physical education, those kinds of things that will happen outside. But the other programs that may be a science outdoor course or an outdoor program, I can't speak to that because we haven't had the opportunity to work with the teachers directly around that. Though we have expectations that that's going to happen, but I wouldn't be able to speak specifically in a way that would say these courses are going to happen outside. And we have those 10 days before school begins that we actually look at that. Meg, I don't know whether you want to add to that. Michelle, you want to add to that in any way, or if that generally is the spirit of what we've been dealing with?
I think it is. Our teachers have been working with coordinators all summer. I think our teachers have also done a number of outdoor activities when we did not have the pandemic and used the outdoors as a classroom. So I think some of them are very well, have done that, have received grant funding to actually explore that. I think it is a matter, like Dr. Marini said, of coordinating with them and getting with them. They've been working, and I know Michelle will speak to this too, around specific curricular projects. And so, if the school committee wants to know more about that, we can certainly get that information. It's important information to have, and I'll turn it over to Michelle.
No, all I was going to say was, I think it's the intentionality of how you use the space. So not just saying we're going to take our math class and go outside, but having some intentionality around what it is that we're going to do outside. And so we have started to work with some groups of teachers in small pockets to talk about this and to look at what are the best instructional activities to be done outside. And I think also to the point of Dr. Marini's thoughts about the first thing we need to do is address the social emotional needs of students in community building in any, it doesn't matter what model we're in. And so using that space for that initially is probably our first line.
And then getting back to the social emotional piece, is there a commitment to ensure that students in all grades have an opportunity to meet their classmates and their teacher fairly early on in the year?
Yes, there is a commitment to that. And as I've said a number of times, the first commitment or suggestion I got on that actually came from the teachers in terms of they saw that as a great way or an effective way to bring groups of students in with appropriate distancing and to actually have face-to-face conversations with their teachers so they would know who they were dealing with. So yes, there is a commitment. And on that score, I think we should be able to move much more quickly in terms of providing the school committee and therefore the larger community sort of a plan for how that's going to happen with each of the grades. Right now, people are struggling with how are we going to make a hybrid work? How are we going to make the hybrid work? What's the schedule going to look like? What's the instruction going to look like? What's remote learning going to look like? And when they talk about the tense and the social emotional, there's a level of confidence that connecting with kids in real time, we got that. And there's a lot of time is being spent on the sort of the newness of it because we got to hit it right. So there's a lot of time being spent on courses and program distance learning and figuring out what the, even though we're starting off more or less in remote, figuring out what does this hybrid look like so we can bring students in. That's really where the focus has been. But I think we should make a note of that because that question has been asked a number of times and I think we need to bring a much more satisfactory response. So we'll do that. And we'll make a note of that, will you?
And then sort of another category I wanted to revisit, the most vulnerable student population.
Yeah.
At prior presentations, we've heard there's an estimated number of 300 students that include various categories. Several school committee members expressed concern about having such narrow categories and possible stigmatization that could occur if it remains that narrow. So I'm just wondering if that plan has been further developed in terms of potential other groups of students who could be included for in-person learning right away. A possible benefit of that being expanded inclusion for our special education students. So I'm just wondering where that stands.
So I can speak a little bit to that. I do know that there is a meeting on Tuesday that Casey is holding with some of our directors in different programs to go through the list of students that not only, excuse me, principals have provided, but that the directors of those programs believe should be included in the most vulnerable list. Maybe not for reasons around, their socioeconomic status, but for other reasons. So that meeting is happening on Tuesday. And I also know that Casey had some conversations towards the end of last week with some folks regarding essential workers, families, and some other students as well. So I would say at the next meeting, we should have a better update for you on those numbers and the population of students.
Yeah. Is there a specific, David, that mean, I have it in terms of, are we narrowing the definition too much? But is there another?
Well, I think it would be if there were a way to include some general education students from diverse backgrounds all across the spectrum.
Okay.
I think it's important for the special education inclusion model because I'm just concerned that if it's too narrow, we're stigmatizing certain groups and we're not really giving the students in person the broad experience that they would otherwise be accustomed to. I understand it's difficult when dealing with limited numbers, but I would hope that there is some way to have representation across all different groups rather than just 3 or 4.
Okay, very good. I think I have the question, and we will report back on that at the next school committee meeting. Great.
Thank you, David. Susan, Andy, or Mariah? Mariah?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. One is if we could get an update on the HVAC timeline and where that stands in terms of building readiness.
Is Matt on the line?
Oh, he was here. Maybe he's gone now.
He's gone for a little bit. He left me some notes. So
I can also, I have other questions if you want me to.
well, let me give you the note that I have, and then if we need more, he's scheduled to come back later in the meeting as well. So they've had progress. They've had samples taken measuring supply and return from classrooms at the following schools: Baker, Runkle, OLS, 115 Greeno, Tappan, Lawrence, Pierce Primary, and Driscoll. 800 portable units were ordered and 100 units are on hand. That's the HVAC work so far. So they're in process of getting all of that measured. And I believe panel 4 tomorrow, I was on a call today. Panel 4 tomorrow is going to have an update on their recommendation as well. So more detailed information what might be coming out tomorrow on that recommendation. And they're generating a report for the committee out of tomorrow's meeting.
Okay. Then I have a couple comments and questions. I also, like Helen, and I think like Barbara possibly, sorry, I'm pouring cereal for a 3-year-old. Give me 1 second. Multitasking. So I guess I want to push back on grades 1 and 2 as well. And part of my question is, I mean, it slays me because first graders can't read, right? Second graders are just barely reading. And so I wonder, because I think we've heard that other districts are bringing more than just kindergarten back, aren't they? Some other districts are bringing first and possibly second back, isn't Cambridge? And so I guess my question is, how are they doing that? And I'm not asking you to answer that in real time. I guess I'm just wondering, like, why we aren't able to, when they are, assuming that they also have buildings that are, don't have huge amounts of extra space, and assuming that they have not huge amounts of extra financial resources, have they managed to figure it out? And it's very much an open question. It would be interesting to understand that, because to me, it's just such a terrible shame if we can't get those kids in full time. Do you actually know how they can do it, or do you not know?
I don't know how Cambridge can do it, but if it's the will of the committee, Suzanne, because Helen has mentioned it as well, it seems that there's a number of questions around that we're going to need to demonstrate really what's happening there, and not just say it. We need, it's like my old English teacher used to say, "Don't tell me, show me." And it's possible that that we should do that here, because otherwise we're going to be spinning around. And I mean, let's be clear that my comments last week were not helped because my heart is in a different place too. But and if the data doesn't allow us to do it, then we should be able to show you that, and it should be definitive so that it's not a lack of will. It's that we're not able to do it. So I've actually put that on. We'll come back with some information about that as well. That'll be.
And I think that one of the things, and I think it was Helen also who sort of alluded to this, which is when we see what the Remote Learning Academy attendance or enrollment is, that might actually show that we could almost keep kindergarten within its current boundaries, so to speak, within very close to its number of classrooms. And then that would allow us to bring back, to not have to worry about some of those additional costs. We might see similar things for first grade. And it just, to me, it's such a huge, it's emotional, right? I don't have a first grader, and this is very emotional. I think about these little kids and what they can do, and thinking at reflecting on what you said at the beginning, Jim, about families and the burden on families. And I think the burden for families, I can say as the parent of a 3-year-old, right, the burden on families with little kids is very acute. And so what we can do to help those children and help their families make their education the best it can be.
So let me say, thank you for saying that. I just want to reiterate what you said, because it'll reinforce what's driving me nuts. And so let me just say it. That is, depending upon what the enrollment is for the Distance Learning Academy, Online Academy, what are we calling it?
Remote Learning Academy.
Remote Learning Academy. Depending upon that enrollment, that may have an impact on the class size for kindergarten, which then, heaven forbid, would create a change in the plan, an adjustment to the plan, which feels like a change, and I'm looking for what's definitive, what's certain, what can we take to the bank, and precious little. And so so I'm so happy that you said that, because when the enrollments come in, it may trigger a different adjustment, and it may be sort of a later notice adjustment than people really want. But that's just my point, is thank you for saying it. And I do think that we can look to see. At this point, I don't think it would trigger a change, but you never know what's going to happen when the enrollments actually come in. So thank you, Mariah, for saying that. And we will. I do think we need to demonstrate this a little more clearly, and we will do that.
And maybe next week, with the data from how many people have submitted their info by Monday, you might have a better sense of
exactly
what that looks like. And on that note, I have a question on that, which is, it feels like for a lot of families, they don't have enough information yet. Hopefully Friday's FAQ that Erin mentioned will help answer some of the questions people still have, but especially for families with children who are in special education. There's a forum on the 25th, I believe, which is the day after people are supposed to select. So I guess I'm wondering if rather than having Monday be the firm date, we could say to people, if you know what you need to know by Monday, please select. But if you can't make a decision yet, then there's more time to be had. And maybe that's implicit, that like people don't fill it in and they're late. But since I personally don't know what happens if families don't respond, like do they get put into something and it's not their choice? You know what I mean? Like, I guess like what we deal with that flexibility, knowing that some families, especially the families with children in special education, have an absolute thing happening after the 24th. So have you sort of thought about how that date might be a little more flexible, and what's going to happen if people don't respond?
Let me just give you an analogy. We were supposed to submit our plan to the state on August 10th. And when August 10th was approaching, the commissioner said, all right, we'll go to the 14th. So it becomes a matter of, you've got this extenuating, we are having a forum, and we are going to be meeting with the special education families before that. And then we're going to be reporting out to the school committee an update on our special education programs and our services and all that. We're not going to be dealing with individual cases. We're going to be talking about the overview and some of the direction we need to go. Casey's going to speak to that much more clearly than I can. But that may impact a decision that somebody is going to make. So we would say precisely what you're saying. If you know what you're going to do now, fill it out now, because we need the information as soon as possible. And if it didn't come in until after the school committee meeting, then it didn't come in until after the school committee meeting. You know, they're not going to be assigned anywhere without having the opportunity I mean, it's not as if they just don't want to submit it. They may not want to submit it, but it's not as if they are just ignoring it and saying, do the best you can, you know, you're on your own. They're seeking the latest information that they can get to base their decision. And lo and behold, we're having a forum on special education the day after the form is due. And so, I mean, it's pretty clear. If you know right now, fill it out, send it in, please, please, please. And if you don't, we can give you the grace of the day after, so that you make a decision after you've heard the information, and please submit it.
Okay, then I just have two more comments. One is about the Remote Learning Academy, and just I'm going to echo what Jennifer said about continuity of community and my fear about like kids not feeling like they're going to have connection, the lack of belonging that they might feel, sort of the isolation that they're already feeling, and that's a real, that concerns me, that they're being not only, it's almost like what the way this has been described really concerns me from two perspectives. Not only that they're not necessarily going to be with their school community, but that at least the way it was described in the handout, which doesn't quite match with what Meg said a little while ago, for possibilities, but there would be no in-person opportunities for Remote Learning Academy, that it would be fully remote. And so the idea that they are completely separate from the kids who they went to school with before, and they can't make in-person connections with their Remote Learning Academy peers, even if in very limited outdoor socially distanced ways, it sort of just feels like it's hitting them coming and going. And so I just want to ask and maybe request that be thought about a little bit more in terms of what we can do to help those kids, knowing how vulnerable they are, knowing that they're there because their families have something else going on that really makes it, it's just like one more thing for them. And so I'd really like to ask for that to be thought a little bit more. And then my last question is, I heard a rumor, and I wonder if it could be addressed, which is that in the middle of a huge national, I will say, reawakening about racial injustice and a pandemic that disproportionately affects the health of people of color, I heard that the Calculus Project funding got zeroed out. Is that the case? Or is Calculus Project definitely continuing on for this next year?
Is Hal still on the call? The Office of Teaching and Learning has been working in collaboration with the high school to fund the Calculus Project. So my understanding, Hal, we're having the Calculus Project, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
We're continuing. They've been distributing materials and doing Calculus Project over the summer, and it will continue.
I heard it had
through
been
next year
zeroed
for
out
sure.
for the school year. So that's
No.
not true. It has not,
No.
because I have a kid in
No.
Calculus Project for the summer. Okay, that's
No.
great to hear.
We're
Mariah, I
paying
think what happened,
stipends.
yeah,
What
Mariah,
did
I
get
think what
zeroed
happened-
out?
Yeah, I think what happened was that line item got eliminated, but the school committee was crystal clear that the program had to get funded some other way. So technically it's true, that line item got deleted by the school committee, but over multiple meetings, it was clear it had to keep getting funded. And so it is still, the commitment to the funding and the program is still there. It got moved.
Okay.
Actually, we are actually creating a line item for it. It hasn't
Right.
never had one.
Right.
So we're
Good.
actually creating one. I'm paying stipends, have stipends to pay. What did get zeroed out though is the ADL component that we had at the middle school. So that did get
The Young Scholars or the
no,
the
the
ADL?
the
Oh, yeah, okay.
ADL piece.
Okay.
That not the, I don't believe the Young Scholars, the ADL piece.
But I want to just speak to that for a moment, because Dr. Marini was contacted by ADL, and Michelle and I haven't given him this report yet, but all of our schools are very interested in continuing with ADL, and ADL wants to work with us in giving us a scholarship to continue. So it's kind of, this is the surprise the superintendent that doesn't want to hear, but anyway, that almost all of our schools are going to be working with ADL. They have the opportunity to opt in or opt out. So Anyway, it's a good surprise, Dr. Marini. Sorry for.
Oh, and me, thank you, because we need funding for stipends if that's the case.
No,
Yeah, thanks, Meg. No surprise. I got the letter from ADL. I know ADL reasonably well, and they're on my to-do list.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. Susan or Andy?
So I'm really proud that I've narrowed this down to 9 questions. That's like a big improvement from the number I came in with, and mostly because my very talented colleagues already asked a lot of them, and the team, I mean, all of you have really answered a lot of them. So first of all, thank you. A lot has become a lot clearer in the last week. And I think the team of educators has been really responsive on a number of areas. First of all, I mean, just the concerns of how long the commitment will be. I mean, the quarter versus the semester, I've already gotten text messages from people saying, oh my goodness, you know, I could see their shoulders sort of relaxing a little bit over the text message, just because with so much unknown, the stakes of the decision that we're asking people to make with all these unknowns is a lot lower if it's through the end of a marking period, whatever that is, given the 10 days, but just as opposed to like through until 2021 feels like, oh my God, that's so long. Every day feels like a week right now. So 2021 doesn't seem like it's gonna ever happen. So first of all, just thank you for that, and for a whole bunch of other things. Where someone has said something, I'm not gonna repeat it. I'll just sort of give a +1. The first one, and this is the only one I actually will go on about a little bit, is the importance for the Remote Learning Academy of that connection to the homeschool community. There are a couple of different, I'm just to add a couple things on this. So one is like in an ideal world, we would really integrate them somehow into the community through specials and whatever. I totally get that this is gonna be a scheduling nightmare, and that might not be possible. I think there's sort of a second question of the support services around guidance and special education, which I think you noted. And to me, that's a little bit different because those are particular relationships and particular issues. And I guess the last thing I would say, though, is that there's a whole set of things. I mean, a school isn't just the classroom, right? The school is, and I'll just name Driscoll, right? Arts Equinox is an enormous event. The entire school participates. It's like weeks in preparation, and you know, it's like a full day or two. Science Solstice is a 2-day-long extravaganza where, you know, people come in from the Museum of Science and they're like blowing things up in the auditorium. I mean, it's an enormous thing, and those things will have to change. But the notion of, you know, Driscoll's Lunar New Year, right, is such a big thing. Pumpkin Fest at Lincoln School. Every school has their sets of traditions, and the 8th grade play, I mean, I can't even begin to think about that one, but just there are things that sense of loss is already going to be so hard. And I think that if we were literally standing up a remote learning academy as a night school with its own culture, its own cohort, its own traditions, its own school colors, its own, you know, 7th grade basketball team, whatever. I know we're not playing basketball. I mean, I don't know if we're playing basketball. Anyway, but just like the point is that we're not giving them a school, right? We're not giving them a new identity. And I just think that a number of these pieces of that experience are so important. And I think it's a different mental model if we say, we're going to stand up a remote learning academy as a separate thing and integrate it as much as possible with people's home schools. That's a different thing from saying they need to feel like they are part of their home school, and we will figure out the educational piece of this also. So I guess I would just, if we put that as one of the first rocks in the bucket, we would design differently, I think, than if you try to kind of like tack it on at the end and wherever possible, try to like shoehorn them back into their home school. I would really ask, and given this conversation, I'm even more convinced about whether we need to make that more of a design principle. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. It's a hard thing to do with 8 schools. It's a very different feel if it's a design principle versus sort of an add-on at the end. I think you'll get to a different place. So that one I actually feel really strongly about. The other ones, so I won't go into all my high school questions because we're going to have a high school thing, but first of all, I just want to thank you to Anthony and Hal and the whole team. I know there was a teacher, it was an unconference this week. Maybe if you could just give us a word or two about that. I think there was energy around that. People were excited about teachers teaching teachers about how they've taught and what they've learned. So maybe you can just give us like 1 minute on that, and then I won't ask all my more detailed questions.
Sure. The unconference came out of some of the extensive PD that was funded by the BEF and others, and there was just a ton of work going on. And today and yesterday there were 3-hour sessions within which there were 1-hour pieces to report on the different things people had studied. So it was, some of it was ACE reporting out on what they've been doing. Some of it was about data and what we learned about student achievement and student gaps through the spring. And a whole bunch of different reports that came out. There's a great website that was formed. Actually, we should probably put it on the high school website. I will make sure that we do that by tomorrow. There was at least 6 or 7 different conferences, and they were very well attended. Today we had at least 25 people in the data conference, and some of the conferences had upward of 50 people, 50 educators engaged in professional discussion based on the work they had been doing over the course of summer.
Good. So thank you to all of those educators who work so hard to make those happen and to come. And maybe my only request when you guys come back is that we not only spend time on sort of troop movements around the buildings, but we really spend time on the pedagogy, because you guys have been thinking, just as Dr. Marini said at the beginning, they're kind of whole kids and we have to think about them as whole families. I just want to make sure we're not spending so much time on the masks and the desks and the distancing, that we as a school committee aren't hearing all of the great work that's happening on the pedagogical side that you guys are working on. So that would be really my only request if we're going to do a session. Okay, great. I mean, people literally like, are we doing chemistry labs in my kitchen now that are going to blow things up? And how are we doing physics remotely, and what's happening with APs, and what's happening with, what's happening with from a pedagogical point of view, the list is really long. Okay. I just want to underscore, and I won't go into what Mariah raised about the CPAC. If we're going to spend time Monday night on special education and you're having a session with CPAC on Tuesday, I just don't want people to feel pressured given that because there's so much anguish right now on the deadline, on the Monday deadline, given those two things. So just want to name that. So this is another place that we haven't spent a lot of time on, but we spent a little bit of time. I talked to Meg a lot about it, and I really appreciated her thoughts. I think there's been a lot of talk about parents as partners and engaging parents as partners in the educational process, especially since they will be essentially, especially in the remote only start, really critical in that process. I have to keep sort of emphasizing that so many parents are not going to be able to do that despite their very best intentions. And I think if you are 2 high-powered working parents with 60-hour-a-week jobs and 3 kids, you just aren't going to be able to spend the kind of time that I think some of these parent engagement strategies might be expecting. Similarly, if you're with a grandparent all day and the grandparent doesn't speak English, I think we have to be cognizant that what a working parent can do when they come home at 6:30 at night exhausted is just going to be really limited relative to what other parents can do. Similarly, if you're a single mom, you've got 3 kids, you work full time, there's just no way that those people can fully partner with the schools. And the notion of putting additional stress on them by basically telling them they're not being good parents because they are not acting as teachers and educators in the way that Brookline is holding up as the way parents have to be, my heart goes out to them proactively. But and I want to say this as a value statement, this is the job of public education. This is our job. And if parents can't do this work, and many of them can't, and I'm more concerned about the ones who have resource issues than the 2 very high-powered wealthy people at 65-hour-a-week jobs. But if they can't do this work, that is the public education system's job. And I just kind of have to keep saying that, because I want to make sure that in no way do they feel like that is their job now. And some of it is about, and it's mostly about the promise and the value of public education. So and equity. So I'll just leave that one there. So I guess I would just ask that whatever it is that we expect parents to do, whatever we're making them videos to do, whatever we're trying to teach them about, X, Y, or Z, that we just keep that in mind. And I think it is different for the K-3 kids where they really can't do a lot on their own, and we're just going to have to figure that out. We're going to have to support them with paras or guidance counselors or whatever it is. But we can't make them feel less than for not being able to do this. That's our job. Okay, so then I have a whole set of questions about, I'm on question 5, by the way, out of 9. I'm gonna go faster. Thank you for laughing, Jim. I appreciate that.
Each question has 3 parts to it.
Well, I'm trying. I'm going as fast as I can. Plus, I have to ask all Sharon's questions too because she's not here. So, and I got it down to 9. Okay. So for hybrid, I think there are going to be questions about what happens during quarantine. And there's a lot of debate as to whether they should go into the remote learning academy or whether they should stay with their home schools in some sort of process. And I'm not going to, I don't want to weigh in on that right now because I know you guys are thinking about it, but all I would say is like if one kid in a family gets quarantined, all 3 kids get quarantined in a hybrid, right? All 3 kids get quarantined for 2 weeks. And then a week and a half later, the mom gets quarantined from work or whatever. And then all 3 kids are quarantined for another 2 weeks. And so it may be true that despite our best intentions in the hybrid model, children are spending far more time out, not only the 50% time out, but like way more time out than we ever anticipated. So I just want to underscore Hal's notion of like, look, there is a fundamental way in which like this is all remote, right? And because it has to work remote for these kids. So I think I'm just gonna put a sticker on that one of like really, really thinking through the hybrid experience for kids who are quarantined and maybe serially quarantined over time. Or let's say a parent gets sick, then they're out for a month, right? Because the parent's sick for all that time. And then there's a 14-day quarantine. So sometimes when you start thinking, you go down these rabbit holes and you realize, oh my God, that kid's not gonna be in school. They're not gonna be in school. So what do we do? Okay, question 6. I just wanna give a shout out and a thanks to the panels. They've done amazing work. Not only panel 4, which has gotten a ton of airtime, appropriately so, for testing and distancing and ventilation. And I know there's gonna be more on that. The governor just made an announcement today on testing, which I don't think it affects us as much as other people might think it does, but at any rate, there's all that. There's panel 1 and 2 are doing great work on parent engagement. Like we said, they are really willing to be arms and legs to help with communication and engagement and pairing parents up and creating networks of parents to support each other, which is just phenomenal. And I think this is such an opportunity, if we do it well, to do something that I think used to happen more in Brookline, that just sort of on a schoolhouse basis, parents really got much more involved. And I think there was a period of time where parents were really sort of pulled out of the buildings, and it kind of, and the culture sort of reflected that. And it just feels to me like this is an amazing opportunity to just re-engage them productively as volunteers. And by the way, I want to say one of the things that worked about the volunteers with the windows is that not only did a parent, Dave, sort of organize all those volunteers, but it was really closely tethered to a district priority. So, a PSB person says, sure, it'd be great to open every window in the district. We have 1,000 classrooms? I can't do that. And parent says, that's okay. I can create an army of parents who over a weekend can test all those windows and fill out a spreadsheet for you. That would be great, right? And so it's tethered into district priorities as opposed to just sort of on their own. So I just want to name that and name the notion that some of the parents on panel 3 are really standing up professional development with Michelle that will support our educators. They're just all these different places. So hopefully at some point we will be able to recognize them for that, just because they're doing incredible, incredible work, putting in tremendous time. I'm actually going to skip down to number 9 because I see it's getting late. Mary Ellen, how much, when we talk about a professional development day, how much is that worth when we take the entire district offline for a day? Round number. $500,000, $1 million, $10,000? We can't hear.
It's just under $500,000.
Okay, so just under 500,000. So for 10 days, we're going to have educators out, and I just want to emphasize how that's gold, right? It's like literally gold. It's whatever. If we're going to multiply, it's $5 million worth of gold. And I just want to make sure that if there's anything that we can do as a school committee to be helpful on that, I'm not sure there is, but if it's worth $5 million of time to us, just whatever it is we can do to make that as great as possible. So for example, some of our teachers are kind of okay, they're showing up, they're ready to go, and maybe they need, day one to really just check in and see how they're doing and, energize each other. And there may be teachers who are absolutely terrified. And what we know from trauma-informed education is that people who are totally terrified can't learn, can't perform. And so maybe they need a full day of scented candles and grieving and just time to process this thing that we're in. I just think teachers are going to be in different places. And just like we talk about taking care of our kids and taking care of our families, and differentiating instruction for our kids, I just think that and I'm sure the principals are on this, I just feel the need to say it. I just really want to make sure we're, certainly at the beginning, taking the time to take care of our teachers, and planning great wellness stuff in addition to the masks and the distancing and the desks and the hallways and the duct tape on the floor. So I just think it's so important, because if our educators need to be sort of comfortable and healthy. So I'm going to skip the rest, but thank you. I just want to say thank you. I know so much work has gotten done, and as we've been saying from the beginning, the only consistency is change. And so just thank you for continuing to swing the bat at this.
Thank you, Susan. Andy?
So I share the fervent belief that first and second graders and maybe third graders do need to be back in school full time. And we've heard that, the need to expand staffing might be a big barrier to making that happen. I'm wondering, do we currently understand the hybrid model well enough to know what the staffing requirements will be for that? Can we be confident that, we won't need to do just as much expansion to make that work as we would in order to bring these folks back for the whole day?
Erin, do you have numbers on that, Erin?
Not, as well as I do numbers for, bringing back the grade 1 or grade 2 in full. We're still kind of planning out the hybrid model in terms of staffing. So I don't want to say anything that is inaccurate.
Okay, but we can't be sure at this point that we would necessarily save on staffing if we brought people back into hybrid rather than into full-time.
Well, we wouldn't have to split classrooms. So that's one thing, right? So if you bring back 20 students in full at 6 feet of distance, they might not fit into the classroom. So you would have to split those classrooms and have 2 classes instead of 1. In the hybrid model, that class is only, in my example, only 10 kids on, Monday, Tuesday, 10 kids on Wednesday, Thursday. So then you don't have to actually split that class in terms of space or teacher.
Yeah, but the actual answer is that we haven't really done the analysis, because we're really, the hybrid model is extremely complex. And so, we're drilling down into it. It definitely has staffing implications, make no mistake about it. However, not as deep as all in, where we have to split the classes. But there again, that'll be part of our analysis that we will bring back. We should be able to look at both of those, side by side, actually.
So Matt Gillis tells me that he should be back at the meeting by 8:20 or 8:30. So I'm hoping that he can give us a more detailed ventilation update at that point, even if we moved on to something else. I did want to just make a comment about that to describe to people what I actually participated in last weekend, so people have some notion of what's being done here. So a group of us were with Joe Allen and his team. Dave Gayshok was there too, who just popped up on your screens. We went around to several representative classrooms in Baker and Runkle, and he and his team, there's this funny device that they use to directly measure flow in these rooms. They did this both with the windows open, on a normal day, and with all the windows closed, but with the building HVAC turned on. right? So with these two measurements, you sort of get a baseline for each room that will tell you, how much more clean air you need to supply in order to make the room usable. And the process for doing this measurement is not complicated. I mean, it is done by professionals, but people can easily be trained to do it. And I think the plan was that district staff would be quickly trained to do this, and that the town does own these devices, and that this could be done pretty quickly. And hopefully that we'd be able to set up something where people could be updated day by day, sort of almost in real time as rooms are measured. And so I guess my question for Matt is how well are we doing this week on making that happen? So perhaps when he comes back, if we could have the opportunity to ask him, even if we're onto something else at that point. I don't know if Dave has anything to add. That's what I saw.
No, I think that's a good description, Andy. I know that Matt had mentioned on a call that that Mary Ellen and I were on with him today that that work is ongoing by staff, but I'd have to defer to him for the metrics of how many rooms have been done. Ultimately, the goal here is just measuring what the delta is between whatever target is ultimately decided upon versus what the baseline is that has to be covered by either an HVAC improvement or a portable air cleaner, which the latter of which is, readily doable for the degrees of deltas we're talking about.
Robin, could you let Matt in?
Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll go and then we'll have Matt do, oh, sorry, Helen.
I just want to follow up on that with Dave in terms of number of students in the classroom. Depending on the size of the classroom, 900 to 1200, et cetera. What was the estimate, or what did Joe say about the ability with the population in the room with good ventilation?
So what Joe and his team have recommended to us as their recommendation, which may or may not mirror what Panel 4 recommends to PSB and what PSB decides. They are recommending a measure based upon air changes per hour, which is irrespective of the occupants in the room. It is based entirely on the volume of air versus the volume of the room, but with some subjective understanding that these are not, whatever the target they're recommending is not a bright line rule that you are safe at X and unsafe at X minus 0.1. There's some flexibility built in, but they are consistently recommending in terms of target 5 air changes an hour ultimately for full occupancy. They're leaving it there. They've given us a scale to say 4 is good, 5 is excellent, 6 is ideal. And then Panel 4 is building off of that in our guidance, which hopefully we finalize tomorrow. Does that answer your question, Helen? You're on mute.
Sort of, but full occupancy, what is the question is, what is full occupancy in our rooms?
So full occupancy is much more likely to be driven by the 6-foot distancing than the ventilation piece here. The fact that if we stick with 6-foot distancing, as Dr. Marini has decided early on, that's going to limit the number of students and teachers in rooms, which is in turn going to create some buffer around the ventilation, because that's going to be much less than the 25 to 35 students per 1,000 square feet that all of these ventilation standards are based on.
So that we're not looking necessarily at 10 kids per classroom, but possibly more like 15, 16.
Yeah, whatever depending on how you measure desk edge to desk edge versus nose to nose for the 6-foot distancing and how much buffer space you want to put in between to allow folks to walk around, that's what's going to drive, but it should be in the range that you're talking about for an average classroom based upon the calculators that I've seen. But I defer to Matt, obviously, for much more detailed expertise on that.
Okay, thank you.
So welcome, Matt. You haven't had a chance to catch your breath, but people would like an update on the HVAC situation, how the classrooms are doing, just kind of an update, ventilation, whatever.
Sure. So we have a contractor that's been going around to each of the schools, sampling a few rooms on each floor to get a validating baseline. The town facilities, contracted out with these folks to do it. They're using actually the same model blowometers that we saw on Saturday, with folks from Harvard that they use from the Chan School of Health. So we believe we're on the right track, getting both the cubic volume of the room, the supply air coming in, the exhaust air going out, starting to calculate the exact air change rate per hour. And then we've ordered the portable units and have, anticipated delivery dates, but I hesitate to give those publicly because things seem to change every half day to every day with just about everything, we're working on, whether it be from the vendor, the installer, or somebody else. But, we should have I'm gonna be in tomorrow morning at the old Lincoln School with the town staff, going over some of the findings and the equipment that we have, because I want to get into each and every room, and I've had that discussions with them that this is, people aren't going to just take the word for it that 2 rooms on the floor are working the way they're supposed to, so everything else is fine. Whether it be one of the 15 or 16 students in the classroom or one of the teachers nearby, somebody's going to ask and want some verification, and we're going to have to be able to produce that in the calculations. And we want to use the portable HEPA cleaners, judiciously and accurately. We've ordered 3 different sizes. I'll call them small, medium, and large. And depending on what the air change rate is per space, will help us determine which portable unit fits the space to bring it up to the good or great standard of 4 to 5 air changes per hour. So that's kind of where we're at, and I believe we've sampled most of the buildings. I just didn't get an update on where they were today, but as of yesterday late morning, what I had forwarded an email and probably got reported out, all those buildings rooms have been tested, and we have information, and then it's just a matter of punching in that data to calculate just how far along we are, whether it's 1.5, 1.7, 2.2, 3.5 air changes per hour. That's kind of the next step, and we're going to be pushing hard on that next week to see how far we can get to be done, for whole buildings and whole grades, so we can answer the questions that I know people have been talking about to get back in. I see Dave's got his hand up, and I will be coordinating with volunteers.
Go ahead, David.
So the one thing I want to emphasize from Panel 4's perspective is that these are really enhanced targets here. Even the good level, the 4.0 air changes per hour, we're talking about, 1 1/3 to even more times what the baseline ventilation standard is on a new school building. We're talking, potentially double or even more what most school buildings feature in terms of ventilation. So we're not dealing in the borderline here in terms of baseline meeting code or not. These levels that Matt's talking about, and that Panel 4 is going to be working its recommendations around this is an extra layer of defense by intention, just like masks are, just like distancing is. These are not kind of whether we squeak by or not.
Okay, I haven't had my turn yet, but Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question from Matt. I just wanted to double check that as measurements are being made in each room, they're doing it under both conditions, like with the windows open and with the windows closed, but the building HVAC system on. Is that what they're doing?
So I know that I'm not with them for each and every one, but they are taking measurements with the units on, because if it's not on, they're getting them turned on, because that's what they're measuring, is what is the mechanical supply. I don't think they're measuring necessarily checking with the windows open per se, because it's going to vary with how the wind is blowing, and that becomes a little bit tricky to take a snapshot measurement. I do have a building that exhausts quite a bit, that I am interested to see if I can get a consistent measurement with a few different tries. And if so, then we'll factor the windows in for that particular space. You know, I'll theoretically say through Halloween on most days that, you know, that may mean we could use fewer or smaller portable units in that particular space while we might be waiting for some other equipment to come in. I do have a update on Pierce, the main building. Next week, I believe they're going to uncap the large unit that's in the middle of the hive and get it turned back on. And they plan to just run the exhaust to take more air out of the space. They're going to cut some holes in the doors and put louvers in for the rooms that are on the perimeter there to be drawing air consistently out there, and then sort of find a way to measure an engineer to measure the air change in that large space. So this cautious optimism, we can get that to work and meet the standard as well.
Jennifer, did you have a question?
No, actually, it's just a comment, and I'll be really quick. And thank you for being so generous with your time, Suzanne. I just wanted to say that better ventilation is better for everyone. So I'm very excited that our goal is to do that, and that this is actually good work for our school buildings for a very long time. We don't know what the future will hold, but you know, we've seen some good research about how good healthy buildings are really good, and whether we have just regular cold and flu season, it'll help keep kids in our school buildings learning for longer, and that's all just really, really good stuff. So I'm glad that our goal is so high, and I do think it's important for the health and safety of our students and their families. So thank you for all your work. And Suzanne?
Okay, batter up, last one. Actually, much of what I had written down, other people have spoken about, but I just say to just reinforce it, I really am hoping we can come up with a way to get first and second graders, even third graders back full time. I know in other districts, they're doing things like finding other spaces within the school. Sometimes they have to use the library or I hate to say, but makerspace room or something like that, so that they can be kind of creative. And they're also doing that with finding staff, so that it may be that some staff will be reassigned from what they're doing and taking on a classroom, so that we don't have a tremendous, because I was it Jim who said, I agree, it's going to be hard to find additional staff. There just aren't that many people out there. So those are some thoughts, but I really think we need to revisit the first and second grade, and we will do that, I'm sure. I know, again, what David said about the outdoor time, not just for community building, but also for actual outdoor education. Remember, again, there's a whole group of staff, K-8, that took a course this summer, a workshop, and so they really have a lead on this and have some good ideas, and so that really should be shared, and I look forward to hearing their good work. Let's see what else. Oh, in terms of, again, if people know what choice they want to make, the sooner they can get that in, the easier it is for us to try and figure out the staffing and the numbers and the number of students and the number of classrooms. So I understand some people will need to wait to hear and get more of their questions answered. But if you know right now, this is for the public, if they know that they are definitely doing remote Learning Academy, or they are definitely signing up for hybrid, it's really helpful if we get that information so we can start to make those plans. I want to put a plug in for common planning time. We haven't really talked about some of the lemonade. I think as Hal said, that they had the BEF grant, and that teachers are really coming together and working and collaborating in a way that they may not have done in the past, and that this is really an opportunity to encourage that. And so I know we're talking a lot about masks and ventilation, and we're talking about a lot about what the schedules look like, but I also think it's an opportunity to really work with our teachers and to give them opportunities to try things, work together, and to really kind of push this notion of common planning time, or affinity groups. Like you may have an affinity group that wants to do outdoor education. And so I think this is actually a good time for that, even though I know we've got so much on our plate. I would hope that that happens. Two more things. One is I still am a little confused about what those hybrid remote days are going to look like. So when you're not in school and you're hybrid, I'm not sure quite what you're doing, what that student is doing. And so I would love some more information about that. And I understand it might not be worked out, and it doesn't have to be worked out yet because we still have some time, but that really is something I am concerned about and just curious about. What is that going to look like? How are students going to be working independently, and what work will they be doing? So that would be really helpful. And then the other area, last one I think, is we haven't talked about testing, and I don't know, Dr. Marini, if you're ready to talk about the efforts, or if you just want to say that there are efforts going forward around testing. This is testing around the pandemic and COVID. And so,
I'll speak to it. Just excuse me. I will speak to it just for a second, but Andy may be able to join in, and I don't know whether Susan will, because you're going to attend the meeting. You may recall the Broad Institute actually invited Brookline to attend a meeting, and Susan Ditkoff may have been the person who stimulated that.
No, it was Nira Pollack, Nira and Jenny Tam, and they deserve, I mean, more credit than anyone will ever give them for
Tremendous credit. But I attended the meeting with Nira, and Andy was there last night. To show you how busy people are, they schedule these meetings to begin at 8:30 p.m. That's when it starts. And but nevertheless, it was a very interesting meeting. Basically what it is there's a coalition that is forming, and the coalition is made up of diverse communities. In this case, at this point, it's Brookline, Wellesley, Somerville, Chelsea, and Revere. So it's a cross section of communities, and its goal is to have testing done for teachers, staff, I should say, and I believe students, symptomatic, with raising money to have that done so that it wouldn't cost anything because it'd be raising money, and they're looking for a district representative and like a municipal side representative. And so there's a meeting with that. As soon as this meeting is over, emails will fly. We have to meet. So there's a meeting that's going to be happening with Mel Kleckner. Dr. Jett has been invited. Thank you, Susan. And we'll be meeting to discuss next steps. And one of the next steps is we have to commit to being part of this coalition. It's kind of revolutionary. It's one of the first, if not in the state, in the country, where to harness the testing sites and with working through a commercial group that would do all the logistics, that they would handle everything, which is daunting in and of itself. But there'll be grants around that, and they're looking for ways of fundraising to support that. And so it's in its infancy. But while we were at this meeting last night, the chair, who's from Wellesley, a physician, I believe, Jesse, is it Bowman? Anyway, he was reading off a list of at least 10 communities that are now petitioning to be part of this coalition. So, and coincidentally, we hear from the state today that the governor is trying to make testing available for schools as well, at least a one-time baseline kind of thing. And so there's a big effort for testing as just another important item that keeps kids in school. Testing with contact tracing. Sharon Abramowitz, if you're listening, you deserve a lot of credit because Sharon was out of the box on this right off the bat. Testing and contact tracing is all part of this. And I have great confidence it's going to come to fruition and because people are pulling together in a big way. So you'll hear more about it. Mel Kleckner is very much on board with it. And I'm sure the select board will be supportive as well. What's to not support? I mean, it's almost altruistic. So you'll hear more about it. You've got great representation from this committee on that coalition as well. And you may actually see this being reported on CNN. CNN's been contacting the chair, and probably Nira as well. She's outstanding, by the way. And to actually be out on national television reporting something out that's right now a concept, but it's kind of exciting. I mean, to be part of this group, this is a group of people who are doers. They get things done. And you can identify with that. This group can. And so it'll be interesting to see. We'll keep you informed. The committee members can keep you informed on a more regular basis who are attending. So, you know, sometimes when you're dealing with something like the pandemic and you're scratching your head wondering, what are we ever going to do? Is anything ever going to get better? And is there any hope? Is there any hope? And bingo, people come together and say, yeah, we'll form a coalition and we'll take this virus on and we're going to do testing and we'll pull it all together. And they did it. One of the principles, and then I'll stop talking, Suzanne, I promise, but one of the foundational principles is exactly what I think Brookline would value, and that this is a coalition of communities that represent the diversity of Massachusetts. And they are committed to that. And from that perspective, it's inspirational. So there you go.
There you go. Thank you for that. I do just want to say, I think Susan said this earlier, that there is a tremendous amount of human hours going into so many parts of this, whether it's school committees, subcommittees, the panels, the coalitions, the task force, the teachers working so hard. It really is quite remarkable what we can do when we come together. I know there's still a lot to be done, but just a big public thank you to all those who have contributed so much, including, as you said, the members on the school committee and on this group right here. So thank you for that. I think that we're going to move on, knowing that we will continue to do updates each time. And Mariah has something she wants to say.
I didn't want to interrupt your moment of questions, but I still had a question for Matt on his update that I didn't get the chance to ask, which was just if there is any update on the timeline based on what the timeline for getting back to school based on what you said.
Well, not really, because it's really dependent on having the equipment in hand and then getting the measurements out of each room. So I know people want a certain answer, and I just don't want to say we can do something and then have to walk it back. I got no problem with people asking me every 48 hours, because as soon as I have good news, I'm going to share it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the financial updates. So Mary Ellen, I think you and Susan.
So in your packet, you should have two folders. One is the one for financial updates, and inside that, you should have a year-end FY20 closing folder that we shared with the finance subcommittee. So essentially on the FY20 closing, we balanced our budget, or we ended the year greater than zero. And there are a couple different factors that we had happening at that point. We were able to balance out all the grant deficits that we were experiencing, as well as the revolving fund deficits in food service and in BEEP as well. We also were able to leave. Yes.
I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking at what we have, and we don't have that year-end report. We have a FY21 opening summary.
Okay, I don't know if it got in there. So let me show Robin. Do I have permission to show my screen?
Yes, you do. I think it's in the folder.
It came in as a zip, Robin. So not quite sure.
Does it say year-end transfer?
This is a Google thing. Let me show my screen. The summary. summary of the memo that should be in your folder or will be in your folder. It's kind of where we ended. We did not use the reserve fund transfer. The advisory committee did not rescind that, so that still had to come to our budget. So we returned that. So essentially we ended our budget with a $10,000 balance. As well as what I was able to do is we did not need to use all of the circuit breaker funds. So I'd like to sort of address kind of some of the funds we didn't need to do in the 21 opening, or at least use it as a segue. And I left a balance, was able to leave a balance in the tuition and materials fee account as well for 21 to help and support 21. And the materials fee and tuition account typically would pay for up to 6 teachers a year. So that's where we kind of ended in 20. Are there any specific questions about that? About 20 that people want specifically answered?
I can't really see people, so just jump in.
I'll stop sharing.
Any questions? Mary Ellen, I just have one. Are we done with FY20? I'm ready to be done. I mean, is this like the grand finale? Are we now done?
Well, so there's one little cleanup task we have, and that's the DESE end of year report that has to get signed by the chair of the committee. So sorry, Suzanne, you'll have one more thing you'll need to do sometime in September to sign up on that report.
Okay.
But then you'll be done.
Well, we'll be done. Okay. Well, good job. That's what I want to say.
So.
Suzanne, that's 88 pages for you to read.
How many?
And then the finance subcommittee will enjoy the audit committee visit we have annually to review 20. So then they'll be done.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Some stories just don't seem to end, do they?
Well, it seems like 22 is going to be coming up before we know it.
Yeah, well, it's not uncommon to have 3 budgets all happening at the same time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So, and with 20, I did an opening summary. I can show this one on my screen as well. Kind of, I'm not sure.
You mean 21, right?
21, sorry. Let me do that.
21 is in the.
21 is in the folder. You can read through that. So we've had a couple different, some changes in our sort of off-budget funding sources since June. So like I had said in the report, so roughly we have about $3.3 million in state, federal, and special revenue funds available for 21. And so those are broken up into sort of 3 buckets and different sources. And so page 2, I've outlined where those are. So for special education, they're potentially, they start with about 592,000. So 149 from circuit breaker. And then the really good news, really, really good news if it gets funded, is the applications in the submittal that happens every July potentially could add about 443,000 to 815,000 over our budget. So we budget what we receive in each fiscal year. And so we are just waiting to hear what our reimbursement will be for 21. And so that leaves special education in a good place with additional resources outside of what we typically budget for special education in a year, which is the $475,000 for tuition and contracted services, and then 4 FTEs for unknown staffing. So special education has some resources available to it. General education right now is around 677,000. So there's 280,000, which I've earmarked to cover for the additional teaching staff that we had riffed, but we needed to bring back due to a variety of reasons. So I'm still reconciling some of the RIF situation that came back, and do we actually have funding for all the people that we came back? So I've earmarked that to fund that as well. And then we have CARES Act grant, and I went through what those funds are being expended on with the finance subcommittee, and then the remote learning technology essentials grant, which is going to be providing some internet access, and Meg Massini and Scott Moore are working on that with myself and Feng Yang from the IT department. And then for operations, for cleaning and food service and HVAC, the PPE, we have roughly about $2.1 million. So we will be receiving $225 per student of 1.7 million, specifically for building modifications, PPE, food service, cleaning services, IT distribution. We just got notified today that we'll be able to do that with those funds. And then the town's CARES Act funds, we didn't need all of the ones we had requested in 20, and so we're carrying those over. And the town's CARES Act, I need to share with you, is that they are picking up the cost of the tents for the school department. They're picking up another $200,000 in PPE expenses for us as well. So that's sort of the new news around sort of additional funding outside of our operating budget. The last piece of news on sort of the revenue side on the operating budget that we don't know yet is that we got a new adjustment for Chapter 70 and the general government assistance that comes through the chair sheet for the town. And Melissa Goff, Gina Franconi, and Mel Kleckner are meeting Monday to go through and see what the local receipts and local revenue estimates are to prep for a special town meeting in November. Some receipts are way up, building permits and pot receipts are way up, but hotel, motel, restaurant receipts, parking and others are way down. And including our Medicaid reimbursement is also down, and I need to do some research on why that dropped, because we do provide the same services. And so there might be about under $1 million that may be available to be adjusted to our annual budget as part of the November town meeting. Of course, we need to know that sooner than later if we're going to be needing to add any teachers for September. So that's really kind of the revenue changes. I've also included in this memo as well is personnel updates and changes. As you know, there were a significant number of positions in central office that were reduced or adjusted, and we've had some modifications to that plan, and I've outlined those as well. And in this table, in terms of what the superintendent has made some decisions around staffing and changes for those reductions, but all reductions of the senior staff have actually, senior staff as well as the central office staff have occurred and have happened. There's a couple pieces where we need to fill back in a K-12 coordinator for wellness, because those staff members do need some leadership and coordination. And we've adjusted the OTL, was going from 4 to 3 positions, and now it's gone to 2 positions due to some change in personnel that has occurred since July 1. Also with staffing, we just got the notification around athletics. And so we're still piecing together what the $455,000 reduction was the school committee made to sort of additional compensation stipends. A portion of that was athletics, was reducing athletics. I want to remind the committee that they did cut intramurals from operating, and the ILT stipends. And so we're continuing to reconcile the rest of those. stipends to meet that $455,000 reduction. The principals met in July, and so you see on the table that's provided to you on page 4, additional discussion from the principals about activities that are not going to run in this year, and we will begin to in the next week. I'll be getting to the principals what stipends that are on Schedule B of Unit A that will be running, and I'll be able to review the memo that we got on the 18th with Pete Rittenberg and the impact it has on athletics and coaching stipends, and what programs are going to be running and what the coaching staff is going to need to look like based on the memo that's included in the folder that you have. So that is the $455,000 reduction that we've had. And ADL, you heard this evening, I guess is going to be modified potentially. The expense update, nothing has really changed. The only thing that has occurred is I've been meeting individually with each department to review their expense allocations because, well, tuitions and special ed transportation operations portions were increased. The rest of the budgets and the curriculum coordinators really experienced a $975,000 reduction. And that was on top of the $600,000 reduction that they had in FY20. And so I've been meeting individually with them about the kinds of things that are happening to their expense accounts. So two of which are to inform them that there are no travel expenses, and given a virtual environment, you don't really need those, or the expectation is that we're not going to need them. Those were cut, as well as any type of food or catering meals and things like that were also reduced. And to talk to them about sort of how do you manage your budget in this kind of environment where you're not quite sure what you're going to need. A lot of the questions from the staff have come up with, well, we're going to be, handing out books and textbooks. They're going to be going home. Can we charge a fee in advance? And I say, no, but we can do a lost book fee. So we may be generating sort of a replacement cost fee for students if books are lost. We have a means of recovering. That's a typical thing that we do every year, but no, we can't charge a fee for handing out supplies and materials. We are supposed to be a free and public education, but we can recoup the cost if they're lost. So that's my very fast kind of update about our opening. If you have any questions, happy to field those.
Seeing no questions, I'll say thank you, Mary Ellen, and we'll move on. Okay, capital project updates. Mary Ellen, Helen, and Susan. We're talking about just a quick update. Brookline High School, Driscoll, and Pierce projects.
So I'm happy to start. The Driscoll Building Committee met this morning. The last we talked about it as a school committee, we had approved extending the timeline of the project to not only give the Driscoll community the use of the fields between now and March 1st, as opposed to taking them offline on October 1st, but also there are anticipated savings that will go along with that. I'm trying to pull up the number, but I want to say that the estimate is in the $1 million and a half range. Because of what's essentially the difference between what we, 1.3 million, what we assumed escalation would be versus what escalation is looking like it will be. So it's about $1.3 million of anticipated savings there. Obviously, we don't realize it until the bids come back, but that's an important advantage of the delay as well. The other thing we've done is the team has been working really hard on thinking about value engineering, and the sort of the headline on that is that the team has identified and the building committee approved this morning just under $1 million of value management items. And in some instances, we were talking to, the auditorium, for example, we're talking to Kenny Kozol and Lauren Cicchini on different issues. We're talking to different people and assessing the programmatic costs and benefits. And sometimes we decided to keep it in, sometimes we decided to take it out. Anyway, the net was roughly $700,000 of items that people felt pretty good about, not awesome about, but good about taking as value management at this moment. The last thing I'll say is that the geothermal wells, we could spend an hour on it right now, which we won't, but the building committee is going to be, the building commission, the Brookline Building Commission is going to be meeting on geothermal wells for Driscoll on Monday at 5:30 p.m. And the issue is that we are still maintaining our commitment to fossil fuel free. So that's not a question, but geothermal wells versus air source heat pumps is sort of what's on the table as to exactly how we're going to achieve the fossil fuel free goal status. And so there's a variety of different considerations which will get presented on Monday night about cost, environmental impact, schedule impact, use of the fields, neighbor impact, complexity risk. There are lots of things going on both sides of that. And it is a $2.3 million decision, something like that. So we've been, Carla Benko was at our meeting this morning. I think she's going to be coming on Monday. I'm not 100% sure. A number of the folks in town who were part of the fossil fuel free town meeting warrant article and just other select boards, Climate Action Committee are sort of interested. Anyway, it's sort of a big, complicated conversation. And if anyone is interested in more information, I'm happy to provide it before Monday night, or you can just come Monday night. The only other thing I will say is that that the other piece of what's happening is trying to figure out the impact on the neighborhood during this time. Some of you may remember that if you've been through that part of Brookline, the impact of, there was an energy project on Washington Street, which really impacted not only traffic, but sort of students and safety. And anyway, it was sort of a big issue. And so right now, so they're starting now, even we're not, done with it. We're not even in the bidding process yet, but working now with abutters from the business community, from the residential community, to think about what impacts would look like and traffic patterns and walking and sidewalks closing and the alley behind Washington Square. So that is, there's a whole set of conversations around neighborhood impacts, but those are moving forward. There are lots and lots of issues to resolve. They're talking through them. And I think that's my update from Driscoll. Helen, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I'm sorry I wasn't at the meeting this morning, but I couldn't make it.
That's okay. And it's been great because David Euclid, who is our interim principal, sort of jumped right into the saddle and both hands on the reins, and has been terrific, which is terrific and important for making smooth decisions. And as always, I don't know how many, I feel like Matt Gillis sort of took over the Hermione Granger time turner because he seems to be in a lot of the Driscoll meetings also, but he's also in like 75 other meetings, and he's opening windows and he's like ordering supplies. And I don't understand how many jobs Matt has right now, but at any rate, Matt has been truly phenomenal on this as well as on the high school project also. Which is we'll do next.
You can all develop that skill if you can navigate the spiral staircases at Pierce that we call Hogwarts.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Any questions on Driscoll, or can I keep going? Okay, so the high school, Hal is here. I mean, I'm happy to say a couple things, but frankly, you're living in the middle of it, so you probably should. How's it going?
It's been great. I mean, especially with that great shutdown we got back in June, that really kicked everything into gear. They brought that huge crane in, and anybody in town who's driven by the site immediately sees the progress that's been made, and you really get a sense now of what those buildings are going to look like. They're not quite topped out yet, but the work has been great, and the teams have been good to work with, and they are been very good in terms of working with us on schedule, and we've revised a few things and modified things that'll work better for the operation of the high school.
The only other thing I'll say is that there is some, if you hear wind of it, there are some issues that have gotten escalated within the MBTA. And if you want more information on those, I can provide it. But the select board has gotten involved, the town administrator has gotten involved, and those conversations are ongoing. We'll just leave there. The only other thing I'll say is that there's a warrant article. The warrant, believe it or not, we're already planning for fall town meeting. And the warrant article that was postponed from the May town meeting for the funds for the high school project is going to be getting back onto the plate. So we will have some time over the course of the warrant article process. We'll talk about that again. We will have better information than we had in the past and than we had last May. And a lot more things are sort of known. So hopefully that will be a clearer sort of path forward. I think that's it. I mean, there are chairs in the, or there were chairs in the MLK room if anybody wants to sit in them and try them out. But I think other than that, it's
well, that's important.
We had very important sit tests in
The
those
Tushy
chairs.
test is really critical.
Lively discussion and debate and tipping, very important.
Yes. How hard would a 15-year-old have to work to tip it over? Or their 3,700-pound backpacks that they wear. Okay. Anything else?
Yes, I have for not on that.
Okay. Anything else on the high school project? So as always, thank you to Hal. In particular, Hal is another person with about 11 jobs right now. But thank you for sort of keeping that one pushing forward as fast as possible.
I hope we have kids at the high school learning logistics, because I think that's where things are going, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, for doing both the high school and Driscoll. I don't know how you ended up with two big projects, building projects, but thank you for that. Helen, go ahead.
So the capital subcommittee, as you heard earlier, has been meeting, getting frequent updates on the same issues that we've gotten here. So I'm not going to repeat it. We actually met last Wednesday and at the time decided to meet again this coming Monday to be on top of all of these things between school committee meetings, to make sure the ventilation work is happening, to make sure, just to get frequent updates on all these things. One of the issues that I want to make sure doesn't get lost here is extended day. And I'm not sure if that's a capital subcommittee issue or what subcommittee should be working on that. We did have one docketed item on extended day a while back where they presented their concerns to us at the capital subcommittee. I'm willing to continue, but I'd like to get a sense of the committee where you think that should fall. Together with the administration, of course.
I would say if you're willing to take it on, you can have it, Helen.
Okay, I guess so.
It's not really
I think that probably
curriculum.
makes
Okay.
sense.
It's a lot about buildings and classrooms.
Right. I think once things are more clear about who's going to be in the buildings, then it'll be easier to also talk with them about what their needs might be and how we might be able to work together to accomplish things. Though I do want to reiterate my earlier comment, I'll take the opportunity since I have the floor, about trying to cohort kids in classes for extended day so that it will make it a better, safer environment for both the teachers and the kids going from in the same cohort to the extended day. We do have a meeting set up for Monday with updates. I don't know how much further we will be along. I guess I'll leave that up to Matt, whether I think we will keep that meeting because I want us to keep on track with all of these things. And then probably schedule another meeting for the following week, just because things are moving so quickly. So that's basically the capital subcommittee. Oh, and Pierce, sorry. Pierce, September, we're going to the MSBA with our OPM contract. And actually, I'm glad that we had this on the agenda for today because I need to check with Tony to make sure we have a contract. And I'm not sure if the school committee needs to sign it, but we have more than enough meetings to be able to take that up at between now and the time of the September MSBA meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to policy. David, you're going to help us with this on public comment?
Yes, so once again, we are revisiting our policy on public comment. I do have an update from town council. 2 attorneys in our town council's office responded to me. Both of them indicated that it probably would not be a good idea for us to try to squelch speech in any way. So they're recommending that we not add anything further to the policy in terms of trying to prevent parents or others from speaking about their children in a personal way. The chair would still have discretion to try to move the conversation in another direction if it seemed to be veering into an area that's uncomfortable. So I would be recommending that we heed those admonitions. Then the draft that you have before you today also reflects the edits that Susan had made at our last discussion on this around distinguishing between public comment and a public hearing. Then also today's draft incorporates edits from Mariah, mainly around pronouns, but also there was some additional language about how to sign up for public comment. And there was a line added about in-person meetings as distinguished from remote meetings, because we've been obviously handling public comment for remote meetings differently. Then there were also a couple of minor modifications in terms of referencing the statutory language around public comment that were suggested by John Buckheit, and I incorporated those as well. So if the committee is comfortable, I would like to move that we approve this policy.
Is there a second? Sure, Mariah, thank you. Are there any questions or comments, conversation? Seeing none, I will move to take a vote. Helen?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes, and thank you, David.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. It's unanimous. Thank you, David, for taking in all that input and making that happen. We're now going to move to the school calendar. Dr. Marini, possible vote? I'm not sure if you are ready for that.
Yes, the calendar, when the commissioner cut the school year from 80 to 70 for students and gave the 10 days at the beginning of September for professional development and teacher preparation for the school year. We had 2 days scheduled, 3 days scheduled in there for professional development, which we could roll or bank for a later time in the year. The 10 that were awarded, that were assigned, must be used before the start of the school year and for dedicated purposes. However, the 2 that we have, we need to put them in the calendar, and we tried to place them strategically where teachers could use that time. We could use that time for professional development when we're anticipating that there'll be changes or we'll need to work with teachers around what's happening. And so we placed those 2 days, one on October 19th and the other on January 8th. We looked at March because March has a lot of, has no holidays, but March is also heavy MCAS testing. And students are taking makeup tests for 10th grade in order to pass that. And some who are older, 11th and 12th grade, who need to graduate. So we didn't want to mess around with March. We don't know exactly what the testing schedule is going to be. So we placed it in January. The 2 days have to be placed in, otherwise the teachers wouldn't have their full year's work. It would be 2 days less for them to work. So we had to place those days in. And the other professional day, of course, is the voting day, where we're anticipating a pretty large turnout. So the union has blessed the calendar and has agreed. And so we're bringing it forward for the school committee to vote so that we can publish it and families can make plans.
Jim, could you just give me those dates again, and then I'll get to you, Mariah.
October 19 and January 8.
Thank you. Mariah?
So I had a question, because just as we're thinking about hybrid, hopefully, eventually, and the balance of sort of Monday holidays versus other day holidays, and I did a rough count, and it looked like there were 8 Monday holidays. And I guess I was just wondering about, for example, the professional development day that was scheduled on October 19th, just because it seemed like we would end up with, again, kids, maybe the kids who are scheduled in supposed to be in school for Monday getting shorted compared to if kids are scheduled for Thursday, Friday. So I'm not saying maybe to do the math right now, but just sort of wondering like what that looks like and feels like, sort of throwing that out there as maybe something to, if you haven't done that math already, of what that might do in terms of shorting some kids for in-person time. And then my other question was, what is the thinking about February and April vacation this year? Is there any reason to think that they might not happen?
Well, I have no reason to think that just yet. I mean, of course, there was some concern about that last year, and some people used it for their April vacation. But we don't have any indication of that at this point. And so I don't know if there's a question deeper than that, but no.
I guess my question is sort of, is there a scenario in which they might get canceled? And is there any sort of, like, that is sort of an immediately obvious one where people should be, where parents should be known that these are the dates, but sort of, even if they weren't already thinking twice, like think twice about your availability to travel? I'm just wondering. I don't even.
No, there has been no discussion about that, and I'm not anticipating that those dates will be canceled either.
Okay.
And we just haven't, no. And I thought we did do the count on the Mondays. I thought we did. Erin, did we go through those?
Well, one of the things that we had been talking about with the hybrid on that Wednesday is if there is a Monday holiday, making sure that the students who were in the, let's just say group A, went to school on Tuesday and Wednesday instead of Monday and Tuesday. So they're not, missing out on those Mondays.
Good.
I don't remember the exact math, but that is something we talked about.
So it's kind of like when the high school does an adjusted schedule when it's a short week to make sure that everything gets balanced. Okay, thank you.
David, did you have a question? I thought your hand went up.
I was just going to mention what Erin ended up saying.
Oh, okay.
The balance schedule.
Okay. Do you need a vote tonight, Jim, or no?
Yes, we do. Because the sooner we get this out to the community, the better off we're going to be.
Do we need that in a motion?
Yeah.
I guess so. So what's the motion?
To accept the calendar as amended.
Okay. With the October 19th and the January 8th.
Yes.
Okay. Jennifer, let me get a second. So does someone move that motion? Thank you, Mariah. Do I have a second? Thank you, Susan. Okay, questions, comments, concerns? Jennifer?
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a moment. I needed a 2-second break. I just want to make sure that I'm pretty sure, I can't find the email looking at the actual calendar at the moment. And I just want to make sure that the Lunar New Year that we talked about so vigorously is still represented before I make any votes. Okay.
It is.
Nodding, it's preserved? Okay.
Yes.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Let's go for a vote. Helen?
Yes. And can I just say I'm really pleased we don't have school on election day.
Yeah, I am too. David?
November, the November election. not the
Right.
September one.
Yeah, David,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Barbara,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
and I say yes. And I also like to say two things. One is I'm glad we don't have school on the National Election Day. I think that's really important. And then also, thank you, Erin, for looking at how we would make up for those Monday holidays when there are too many. So thank you for that. Okay, we're down to new business. David, I'm going to put you on the spot for just a second. I wondered if you might just mention that there will be information coming out about filling Sharon's spot on the school committee. I know.
Yes, so under Massachusetts statute, there's a very specific process that's spelled out for towns where there is a vacancy that opens on a board, such as a school committee. That process involves notification of the other school committee members, as well as members of the select board. So we are starting to undertake that process. At the same time, we're also putting together a schedule that will include an opportunity for members of the public to apply to fill that school committee vacancy. The applications would then be gathered, they would be reviewed, there would be interviews. The interviews will occur jointly between the select board as well as the school committee. That's something that's spelled out by state statute. So some might wonder, why is the select board included? Well, we have to include them. And I welcome that. I think it's fine for all of us to meet the various candidates for filling the vacancy. Then we're still working on dates, but this will be sometime in mid-September is when we would formally end up filling the vacancy. It would be done by a roll call vote of all members of the select board and the school committee. The person who is appointed to fill that vacancy will then serve until the next town election. Usually our town elections are in May. And then at that time, there would be another position on the ballot for the regular school committee term, but it would only be for 1 year because Dr. Abramowitz had just 1 year, would have just 1 year remaining on her term as of May, the next town election. So there will be the three-year terms that we normally have every year, plus one one-year term.
Helen.
So in my recollection, when we've done this a few times before, people submitted applications, but then there were interviews. I'm not sure if you mentioned that or not.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, I guess I just didn't hear it. Sorry.
Okay, so the intention would be that a couple days before the votes, there would be a day where we interview.
Okay.
And we're looking at doing that around September 15th, but we do need to check in with members of the select board and just make sure the schedules line up for everybody.
Susan.
Just one note, which is outreach. People are so distracted right now. There's so much going on. And yet it's also a really important opportunity, especially with respect to diversity or race, but specifically, and also other types of diversity, people who may not sort of go through the political process as their first choice. But as we've seen from the panels, there's just incredible talent in this community that doesn't necessarily always show up at things or even think to serve unless specifically asked. So I would hope that we have a pretty robust, given that we're doing everything else also, but just that we have a very robust outreach strategy specifically around racial diversity, but I don't quite know how we're thinking about that.
So my hope would be that we distribute the applications quite broadly on many lists, sort of similar to when we are soliciting volunteers for various task forces or for other searches that we conduct. I think it's important that we reach out through our school committee liaisons to the different organizations with whom we partner, and that we also get something out on Facebook, TMMA, listserv, pretty much anything we can think of to really get the news out there and the application and the information, along with frequent reminders.
I will just, oh, go ahead, Susan.
No, I was just going to say that there are, I think that's all sounds great. I also know that there are a number of groups in town that are specifically interested in this issue that we may or may not have liaisons for. So, I mean, there's Breakthrough, there's the People of Color Coalition in Brookline, there's all of the people who worked so hard on getting the Florida Rufflin Ridley School renamed next month, or it's already renamed but open next month. So there are a variety of different groups, and it may be worth just spending a little bit of time thinking about outreach.
Yeah, good point. I also I think Mariah had suggested that September 15th is the day before school starts. So sometimes people are very excited about that, but it may be quite busy getting the children. That may not be a good night for a gathering.
I think it got adjusted to the 14th by
Okay.
Robin earlier. Yeah,
Okay.
because of that.
Okay, thanks.
And thanks to
Okay.
Robin.
Yeah, thank you. Of course. Thank you, Robin. Okay. I don't want to drop Susan's point, David. So I can talk with you. Susan can join us and we can think about that. I don't want to dismiss it. I want us to do something about that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a pretty good starting list if you want it. I mean, there's also we have, anyway, yes.
I mean, the best way really is for every committee member to reach out to their groups and affiliations and, talk about it. And
I think that's right. I think there are also, though, networks that people on this committee may or may not be in.
No, that's true.
Yeah. So I think there are different, there's a set of networks that at least I am aware of. And I think those people would also know who else we can reach out to. So yes, that's why I'm saying I think we need to, we're a couple steps away potentially from that. But I think there are groups that the school committees work with in the past, and it would be great to sort of more intentionally involve them in this.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to a motion for executive session. It's motion to meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A for the following purposes. Purpose 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, non-aligned personnel. And purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Unit A, Unit B, and paraprofessionals, and with AFSCME, Building Service Employees, Brookline Educational Secretaries Association, and School Food Service Employees, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. Is there a second to the motion? Thank you, Andy. We'll do a roll call. Oh, and as Robin's going to remind me, we are not going to come back into open session. So Helen.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Andy.
Yes.
Susan.
Yes.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Barbara.
Yes.
Mariah.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Robin, can we stay or do we need to go out and come back in?
You have a separate link for the executive session.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, we hope to see everybody shortly. See you on the other side.